Good morning, Salma. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Good morning.
Good morning, Sharon. We're doing a mic check. Can you hear us?
Morning, I can hear you.
Good morning, everybody. Happy Black History Month. Do we have quorum yet?
We're checking.
Okay. I like the name tags. I can't see them, but I do like them.
Okay, Chair. We just received two speakers. One for item number 3,
Okay.
the same person. Just give me 1 second. We're live.
Okay, good morning, everybody, and welcome. And happy Black History Month again. My name is Councillor Moise. I am the chair, the co-chair of the Confronting Anti-Black Racism Advisory Committee. The committee secretary has confirmed that we have quorum, so I will call meeting 2 of the Confronting Anti-Black Racism Advisory Committee to order. And welcome. I'm going to pass it to my co-chair.
Thank you, Councillor Moise. It's a pleasure to be with you all today. My name is Lucina Rakotavau. I am the vice chair of this committee. As we begin this meeting, we want to begin by honoring the land that we are on. Although we are in different locations, the Confronting Anti-Black Racism Advisory Committee acknowledges the land we are meeting on today is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. As we begin this work in Black History Month in the last year of the UN International Decade for People of African Descent, we also acknowledge all treaty peoples, including those who came here as settlers, as migrants either in this generation or in generations past, and those of us who came here involuntarily, particularly forcibly displanted Africans, brought here as a result of the transatlantic slave trade and slavery. Today, we pay tribute to our ancestors of African origin and descent under the themes of recognition, justice, and development. We share these acknowledgements separately to acknowledge the distinct legacies of Indigenous and African peoples here on Turtle Island. I would now like to invite Aisha Nicholson to engage us. Great. I don't believe Aisha will be joining yet.
I believe we're actually opening with drumming first.
Do the drumming? Okay. So we'll invite Rudy Kwame Williams.
I want to start off by acknowledging our history as African people. Not to talk too much, but just to acknowledge our ancestors and the great God that guides us. Onyame, it is I, Kwame, along with the members of the Kabrak committee calling. Onyame is the all-knowing and all-powerful. Onyan Kompong, the ever-present. And Obaje, the great builder. Anansi Kokrotu, the great spider and designer. And Asaseya, the Mother Earth, the life giver and the sustainer. Also, Abasom, the elemental spirits of water, air, fire, and earth. We are calling because we want you to bless and honor our gathering here today so that we may bring forth the collective wisdom that we are due given the people that are in the room. We'd also like to seek forgiveness for anything we may have done wrong in the past or in the recent past. We'd like to thank Onyame for creation, life, family, and community. Medasio, Monekasa, thank you. I'm done. I'm finished. Thank you. And I'm going to play a little drum for you because it is, in many ways our ancestral instrument, and I am always happy to be invited to bring it into the room. So I'm going to play a little bit for you. I also brought with me today the shekere, which doesn't get as much fame, but it's quite an ancient African instrument. And by the way, usually played by the women, right? But I think it's important to have it here too. So we'll give you a little bit of that. We are going, heaven knows where we are going. We know we will. We will get there. Heaven knows we will get there. We know we will.
We want to honor and give thanks to Elder Rudy Kwame Williams, who led us in a drum call to ground and open up our session and minds. Thank you. Rudy Kwame Williams is a multidisciplinary artist who specializes in the use of arts and culture in African-centered learning opportunities. He's a co-founder of Ujima Fathering Centers, a nonprofit organization serving African Canadian fathers and potential fathers. Kwame is a graduate of York University's Fine Arts and MBA programs and was instrumental in founding a number of community arts organizations dedicated to educating and entertaining through the presentation of African and African diaspora music and dance. Rudy Kwame Williams was project manager for the Canadian Institute for People of African Descent feasibility study and is an independent consultant working in organizational development, change management, confronting anti-Black racism and diversity, equity, and inclusion. Kwame is a mentor to youth, community businesses, organizations, and individuals. Thank you for bringing us the talking drums, Elder Kwame. As many of us know, arts have always been a space of strength and excellence of Black communities. So to recognize Black Futures Month, we also wanted to welcome some artistic expression to start the discussions today. So thank you again for that introduction. So I will pass it now back to Councillor Moise. So before we proceed with the agenda, I would like to invite once more Aisha Nicholson, who will be presenting a dance, who will engage us with a dance today.
Oh yes, exit. Say movement of your people. Alright, yeah. Exodus. Well, if you know, now you will know. Say movement of your people. No question, hey. Where them all come kill life for? Two man a real prophet like Elijah. Wash me up with the tranquilizer. Please just come on, be Elijah. Cause them a move deceptive like Delilah. Kill off the youth, but we still Isla. Man a real foreign currency piler. Man the politicians enough for realize. I say boom, corruption, addiction. Country be a bad habits land. People head them all addict pan. That can't fix with a magic wand. So on the king's highway, me a tread it hand. I listen, I see the baddest man. So what? Get the youths, don't fear them. When devil man comes around, Lord, juvenile, you the king select. Say use the intellect. Nobody swing the tech. I look at thing to tech. On a blink for neck. I say pre out the charge where the bingy tech. Hey, bigger heads don't rate the street. This a straight the seat. You would have wait for eat till you wait the bleed. The too late to see. Revolute. This are the day for do it now the truth. Bigger heads hold the slum. They on the podium. And all the throw the guns in all the streets for the youths. Go below the ground. Broad daylight, them throw you down. Hey, government now pave the way. Them all a shave the pay till we in our grave like some slavery days. And that's why I say Exodus. Movements of your people. Exodus. And if you know, now you know. Movements of your people. 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 Can't you see what's happening, people? Ain't nobody laughing, oh no. What you know, that we don't stand a chance at all, oh. People, can't you see what's happening, people? Ain't nobody laughing, oh no. What you know, that we don't stand a chance at all. I say, if you spit up in the sky, then it might fall back in your face. I was born a winner, so them can't take first place. My DNA are one thing, me know them can't erase. Once a man, twice a child, so best you know your place. And free up your mind like a runaway slave. No turning back, we got a victory to gain. Let us get together in this last days. Self-reliance, so that I keep the fire blaze. No, what you gonna do when your kingdom come? Can I get away from the burning sun? Where the fire go blaze, you better change your ways, cause we don't stand a chance at all. And that's why I say Exodus. Oh yes. Movements of your people. I say Exodus. Ooh, oh yes. Movements of your people. Say Exodus. Exodus. Say Exodus. Movements of your people. Yeah. Say Exodus. Oh yeah. Movements of your people.
Thank you so much, Aisha. for that powerful performance. Again, I want to emphasize that the arts have always been a space of strength and excellence of Black communities, and that was a very powerful display of that. Aisha Nicholson is a dancer who hails from Toronto. She is the creator of Movement Check-In, a program that brings artists together on Instagram Live. Her style is a mix of contemporary, modern, African, and Caribbean training. Aisha has worked with choreographers and companies such as Arsenio Andrade, Collective of Black Artists, Garth Fagan, Aria Evans, and Kashi Dance, just to name a few. Aisha has, pardon me, Aisha has performed in Obeah Opera for the Luminato Festival, at the 14th Kerry Festival in Trinidad and Tobago, and in 2020, she choreographed her first inaugural solo called Abandonment. Thank you again, Aisha, for bringing your moves of legacy to our committee. In addition to the last year of the International Decade for People of African Descent, this year the City of Toronto will engage Torontonians about the next part of the journey of the Toronto Action Plan to confront anti-Black racism. So thank you both, Elder Kwame and Aisha, for inviting our ancestors in. I'll now pass it back to Councillor Moise.
Thank you, Lucina, and thank you, everybody, and thank you to Aisha. Good morning. Happy Black Liberation Month to all. It is a pleasure to be convening this committee during a month to honor the deep and enduring impacts, leadership, resilience, and rich continued history of Black Canadians. Black History Month is a critical part of our heritage, reminding us that progress is achieved when we stand together and acknowledge our shared past. As we reflect on this collective history, let's also take a moment to celebrate our resilience, our Black joy, and the invaluable contributions of Black communities. While we proudly embody our Black heritage every day of the year, this month gives us a special opportunity to explore our history in depth, to learn from it, and to reaffirm our commitment to building a future where equality, justice, and unity prevails for all. I am inspired and resolute in my commitment to championing policy ideas and initiatives that will have significant positive impacts on our community. Whether our focus is on prioritizing affordable housing, investing in quality education, ensuring workforce and development opportunities for our youth, advancing mental health initiatives, or fostering transparency in child welfare and justice systems, it's crucial that we work together to tackle these challenges. True systemic change necessitates active participation and leadership from every member of our communities. And I sincerely believe in our collective power to make a difference. I want to express my heartfelt thanks for your tireless efforts in advocating for change within our city and for valuable contributions to the development of our 2023-2026 work plan. Your insights today are pivotal as we collectively strive for positive change in our city and work towards a brighter future for our communities. And again, happy Black History Month. Are there any declarations of interest on the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act? If you would like to declare an interest, please indicate the item number and the nature of the interest. When declaring an interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act, members are also required to file a written declaration with the clerk. City clerk staff can provide you with forms which you should complete and submit before the end of the meeting each time you declare an interest. If you have an interest, please raise your hand or unmute your mic to let me know. And seeing none? No, okay. May I have a motion to confirm the minutes of CABRAC Committee on October 23rd, 2023? I'm going to ask Mr. Williams to move that item. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. So the first item is CR 2.1, an overview and discussion of the 2023-26 Confronting Anti-Black Racism Advisory Committee Work Plan. This is a critical, important discussion to ensure that our work is focused, aligned, and targeted. There continue to be many areas of challenge facing Black residents, and the truth is we are unable to tackle them all at this table. So this selection will ensure we can focus on areas that align with member priorities, align with issues City Council is considering, and will ensure we can drive impact. Staff from the Confronting Anti-Black Racism Unit will give a presentation on the Confronting Anti-Black Racism Advisory Committee Work Plan and will allow us to have a discussion for feedback. Kimber Bryan, manager of the Confronting Anti-Black Racism Unit, and Milena Roberts, leads CABREC Secretariat staff, will share an overview. You may go ahead. Oh, here you are.
Thank you, Councillor Moise. As we wait for our presentation to come up, I really want to thank everyone for being here today. Happy Black History Month. Thank you for allowing us the opportunity to share the priorities and outcomes for the draft of the 2024 to 2026 Confronting Anti-Black Racism Advisory Work Plan.
I think we're just looking for the clerks to bring up the presentation for item 2.1. Members will also have a written outline of the draft work plan in front of them for easier reference. So that should be with all of the members. So we can support screen sharing if there's a challenge on the...
Is your...
Just keep us.
Sorry. Okay, there we go.
So thank you, everyone. Sorry about that. So we're going to proceed. So thank you again, and thank you to the members for taking the time to work through this. So this work plan is really about aligning what each of you had to say on the key issues and areas of influence across your mandated areas. And we're really looking to inform the issues and all the speakers on the committee agenda. And we're looking to outline the outcomes and assess the committee's impact. And really what's important is identify and signal to the priorities of external stakeholders, city staff, and city council. And I wanted to share with each of you, we had a very important expert from the UN Forum on People of African Descent, Gaynell Curry, join us, and she talked about the legacy of enslavement and how from 1838 through to 2015, the UK was still paying out slave owners for the monies that they had lost for ending the enslavement of Africans. So we remember that when we do this work, that the legacy is so recent that we continue to fight against the ways in which there has been impacts of colonialism on us, and we're so happy that you're here and charged with this work. I'll now turn it over to my colleague Milana to talk more about the plan.
Great, thanks, Kemba. So just to give a bit of a context of how we're hoping to use this work plan, as you know, a number of the other advisory committees also have a work plan that really helps guide and align their work. You're all experts and bring significant lived experience and knowledge across a variety of areas that will support and inform the CBRAC's mandate. But we really see this as a tool to do 4 key things. First, to align the variety of experience and expertise you bring to the table across the different areas of work. So there's a common agenda that you can all look to inform how you're making decisions and the progress we want to make. We also see this as a really important tool to reflect on what type of impact you're looking to make across each of the mandate areas. As you'll know, there's quite a wide range of challenges facing Black communities, and as time progresses and over the 2 to 3 year mandate you have, those may shift and ebb and flow. So we want this plan to be grounded in concrete targets and outcomes you're driving toward, but also to have the flexibility to shift. So this allows us to kind of convene around those topics. It will outline both the outcomes to assess the impact you're making in your decision making, but also to give our colleagues, our city staff, community members who we have in the room, as well as city council members, to understand what are your priorities? What are the things that you're discussing at this table to be able to inform city council, but also to be able to have opportunities to bring the work that city staff are moving through at this table as it relates to the things that you're focused on. So those are the kind of 4 areas: aligning the committee, informing key issues and speakers on the agenda, outlining the outcomes to assess success, as well as identifying and allowing external audiences to know what is this committee prioritizing. Next slide, please. So in terms of the process, it would have been great to have launched our February meeting with a work plan in hand, but we had the opportunity to informally hear from members. So we spoke to a number of you who were able to join us for a few informal sessions to hear about what are the priorities, what are the things that you're seeing in the community that really need to be addressed, whether that's through your work, through your lived experience, or otherwise. And we were able to take that feedback and cross-reference it with existing research, community research, council reports, as well as institutional reports to really understand how does that track with what we're hearing. And what we did was, we understood the unique mandate of this committee. So taking that research to assess what are the specific areas of work that this committee is focused on. You guys have 7 areas that you're really drilling down on. And as you know, we also have an action plan to confront anti-Black racism. So we really wanted to think about what are the things that are not being explored in the upcoming 10-year action plan that this committee can create an impact, and how do they relate to the strategies that City Council are focused on and the issues they're looking at, as well as how does it relate to the reports and staff information that's coming forward. So this is a really narrowed selection to ensure that we're not boiling the ocean and we can really drive outcomes in those specific areas. Finally, we took that to be able to identify, what are the areas not only we want to impact, but the kind of outcomes we want to drive. As you know, disaggregated race-based data to create a baseline around where we're at for all of these issues is lacking. So in terms of us thinking about percentage reduction targets was a little bit of a challenge, but thinking about how your advice will inform council to make good decisions and move forward on key issues is how we focus this. So what are the outcomes? What are the big picture things we're working toward? Last but not least, a key part of this process is the discussion at this table. So as the presentation is labeled, this is a draft. It's a strong working draft, so we're really excited to hopefully be able to move it forward as you see here. But we're looking for discussion and feedback on this draft to refine it and approve it at this table to ensure we've got it right. So that's the kind of the 3 key steps of that process. Next slide. So in terms of what we heard, I wanted to give you a sense of, what were the conversations we were able to have with each of you, with our chair, as well as with our vice chair, to inform what are the key things we need to focus on. So we've highlighted them across the 7 themes of your mandate. And the first was around the UN International Decade for People of African Descent. We heard a strong focus on the need to think about cultural space preservation in communities like Little Jamaica, in Blackhurst, as well as elevating Black history. So, there is some Black history taught in schools, but really about moving away from narratives around slavery and enslavement, and really thinking about what is the excellence and the ways that Black communities and leaders have painted and told the story of, Black communities and Black stories in Toronto. We also heard about the need, as part of the legacy of the decade, to increase funding to Black agencies. Around the pillar of health, we heard about a need for a focus on mental health. Black communities have seen a significant rise in mental health challenges since the pandemic, but even prior to that, as well as a focus on food insecurity, a need for collection of disaggregated race-based data, as well as an important need to make connections between the climate health nexus. So this idea that there is no climate justice without racial justice, and the deep inequities there. Great. Around housing, there was a real resonance around this idea of supporting Black communities to age in place, about a need for service navigation supports to move through the housing system, whether that's around accessing targeted supports in the shelter system, around preventing and upstream responses to eviction, as well as addressing and creating opportunities for things like affordable housing targets for Black communities. Around child welfare, we heard strongly that this was a significant issue of concern and that we needed more transparent and accountable public reporting and tracking of children aid services placements, as well as programs that were going to support better outcomes for both children and their families. In education, there was a need to have more not just apprenticeships, but actually support and training in schools around entrepreneurship. Black communities are one of the fastest growing entrepreneur populations, and there was a need to think about how does that track in our education system, whether that's at the middle school level or higher. An emphasis on mentorship, and as well as a continued focus on streaming, as identified by the last committee. Around policing and justice system, we had a real opportunity to talk about transformative justice programs, around the prisoners' rights in terms of thinking about how to support people who are incarcerated or within the justice system, around increasing legal representation, as well as thinking about post-incarceration supports. And last but not least, under the employment and entrepreneurship area, we heard a need to focus on more disaggregated race-based data collection around our businesses. We heard about a need for the city to have greater supports for microloans. So how are we supporting entrepreneurs and businesses to have those types of supports, as well as to think about how the city's connecting with entrepreneurs and thinking about workforce pathways. So these were the things we heard from you, and hopefully you'll be able to see your feedback and your direct influence in the final recommendations for areas to move forward. Next slide. So housing is probably the most ambitious of the areas to focus on, and I think that really reflects the real disparity we're seeing around access across the housing spectrum for Black communities. So one thing I'd like to flag here is that our unit, the CABR unit, is working very closely with the Housing Secretariat at the city, and that's the office that supports affordable housing development, and are working to develop a Black housing framework. So we really see this committee as a critical place, in addition to the Housing Rights Committee, as a critical place to get feedback to inform that. And so you'll see these, we were able to really drill down on these areas. So in terms of the specific outcomes we're looking here is advancing targets for affordable housing, supportive housing, and rent-to-own housing programs for Black residents, with a particular focus on the needs of high-risk residents. So we're thinking about folks who are seniors, people living with disabilities, living on a low income, lone parents, as well as queer and trans youth. We also see an opportunity to advocate for increased rent control supports to assist Black households to remain in place and maintain stable housing. advocate for the development of dementia-friendly communities where people can age in place, advocating for the collection, reporting, and use of disaggregated race-based data for decision-making, providing advice to enhance neighborhood plans to address displacement, advising on the implementation of a Black housing framework, which I spoke about earlier, and advocating for more targeted supports within the shelter system where we're seeing a disproportionate number of Black residents. Next slide. So under employment and entrepreneurship, there were 3 key recommendations that are moved forward, and we're very lucky to have a presentation from our colleagues in EDC here today, so there'll be an opportunity for you guys to already start moving some of this work forward. But the focus were 3. So standardizing the collection of disaggregated race-based data to support city decision-making, as well as invest in small businesses. Increasing access to small business funds. So, how are we creating access to economic development for these groups? Things like microloans, as well as procurement. The city spends billions of dollars in procurement every year. How do we ensure that Black businesses are part of that story? I see heads nodding of our EDC colleagues, so we can hear more about that. And increasing entrepreneurship and supports for workforce pathways. It's one thing to have a job, but having a good job and having a job that can be a career and sustain a family is a really important part of that. Next slide. So the next area is healthcare. There were similarly 3 areas of opportunity here. Tracking and providing strategic advice to enhance and target the city's mental health initiatives. So the city has a mental health support strategy, and we're lucky to have a chair that's also the chair of the Board of Health to make those connections. Advocating for tracking and consistent reporting on Black food insecurity. Black communities, in addition to Indigenous communities, are overrepresented when we're looking at food insecurity rates. And I think we've all heard about the affordability crisis and access to food, as well as connections with climate-induced health issues. We're thinking about air quality, the quality of housing as well, and things of that nature. Advocating for the widespread implementation and use of disaggregated race-based data in the healthcare system and in our health programs is also a critical outcome here. Next slide. So around child welfare, I think this was a really important area, and I think one where there's a real opportunity for this committee to flex its intergovernmental muscle, working with our colleagues at the province, but increasing disaggregated race-based data transparency and accountability in CAS reporting on child welfare. Evaluating and enhancing programs to proactively, so an upstream approach, educate and support parents and families when they are facing these challenges, but also children in care. And then last but not least, mandating education and anti-Black racism training for children's services, not children's services, but children's aid services workers to ensure that an anti-Black racism lens is embedded. And I think this is really important when we think about where folks are streamed into care. It's usually in schools and through workers having discriminatory beliefs. Next slide. Okay, so we're coming near the end here. So policing and the justice system, there were also 3 areas: reviewing and increasing support for transformative justice programs. So we've got a great initiative, Safety at the City, that starts to think about what are alternatives to police. Increasing awareness and access to legal supports. So this is particularly focused on populations we're seeing facing increased interaction with the law, refugees, newcomers, non-English speaking residents, as well as people living with mental health issues and members of the 2S LGBTQ+ community. And identifying opportunities to deliver post-incarceration supports to prevent recidivism, as well as support them into strong workforce pathways. Around education, there are 3 areas as well: increasing workforce development, specifically with an inclusive, equitable, anti-Black racism-informed lens. Lots of entrepreneurship programs, but youth expressing that they're still experiencing anti-Black racism or discrimination in those, particularly in the post-secondary space. Supporting the capacity of Black leaders and community members to sit on boards and agencies. This was a really important flag we had from our council member, really identifying the need to ensure folks have the ability to know how the system works, how to bring forward motions, and how to make the most of their expertise, not just at this committee, but all across the city's boards and committees. And then continuing to engage the Toronto District School Board, which the city has a close relationship with, to advocate about the issue of streaming, as well as public reporting on Black student success. Next slide. All right, so the last of the 7 areas that this committee is focused on is the UN International Decade for People of African Descent. And I think one thing we heard from you is that this is a lens, this is an approach to think about all the work. This is the city's legacy, and this is, not something that is one committee area. And so our recommendation here is to think about having a report at the end of the year to culminate all of the work the city has done to bring forward to this committee to really determine how success has been moved. So the 3 kind of, let's say, criteria to think about is, and outcomes we'd like to drive, are embodying the International Decade of People of African Descent in curriculums, in policymaking, and in programmatic areas of focus, incorporating the decade's goals of justice, recognition, and development in long-term strategic planning. So I think even today, using this lens, we have colleagues here presenting on their work. How is this, demonstrated in the practices that's transforming the day-to-day operations of the city and the lives of Black residents? And last but not least, how is the city finding new ways to stand with people of African descent in Toronto, to transforming barriers to realize truth, justice, recognition, and development. Next slide. So last but not least, I think a key part of this committee's work is informing the work that's already happening at the city. That's a big part of the agenda. So here on the slide, we have some of the strategic policies we've already identified will be brought forward to this committee for advice that aligns with the mandate areas. So the City of Toronto is developing a new senior strategy, which aligns with some of the health outcomes you've identified. New social procurement strategy as well, and a report be coming forward later this year. The Black Housing Framework, as I mentioned earlier. The city's work around Safe TO and the Toronto Community Crisis Response. The official plan review, and we have colleagues here speaking to that. And then, of course, a number of interdivisional and sector-focused plans from our colleagues in economic development and culture. So, it's a lot of information to digest, which is why you've got a more detailed work plan that kind of gives an overview of the scope of each of these areas. Where are we at from a statistics perspective? But we're hoping that this gives some tangible, broad still, but focused areas for your expertise to really inform the city. And we have 2 discussion areas Kemba is going to walk us through to really hear your feedback and have your reflection on, did we get it right, and how can we refine and move forward with these areas. Over to you, Kemba.
Thanks so very much, Milana. So first of all, really looking at what we've presented here, do the issues in the work plan really impact the areas that resonate with you? That's the first question. And are there critical areas of work missing from this work plan that maybe have arisen since we connected with you?
You done your presentation?
Yes.
Okay. Well, thank you, Kemba, and thank you, Milena, for that really great presentation. And thank you to the members who actually took the time prior to this meeting, I think before December, to actually work with staff to come up with these items, which, of course, resonate with me and all of us here today. As mentioned, there's 2 discussion questions here, and I'm happy to start the conversation. Wally Kagali, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Councillor Moise. Thank you so much for your eloquent presentation, and thank you so much for reaching out to members of CABRAC to inform the priorities that you just identified. I was hoping you could speak to 2 pieces that are important to me, and I know many members of the Black community, because we're trying to address this work through an evidence-based approach. So the first being that the Ontario Human Rights Commission issued a report last year, From Impact to Action, which focused on its inquiry into anti-Black racism by Toronto Police Services. And this review includes an examination of how I think it's important to have an examination of how other city agencies and divisions are implementing the recommendations made in the report. So I'm hoping that we could have a discussion on what those recommendations are from the Ontario Human Rights Commission that affect city services, and how we can track and monitor the implementation of those recommendations at the city level, not just through TPS, but learning from that report, seeing what are the best practices and policy changes that are required to basically meet the expectations set by the Ontario Human Rights Commission. And then the second piece that's really critical and important is the budget. You know, we're going through the budget cycle right now. I believe next week, Mayor Olivia Chow has already presented a budget publicly, but it will be considered by council for approval. And what I would like to find out is how we tracking the resources allocated to addressing anti-Black racism within the City of Toronto. So what are the investments being approved or being considered by this budget that will impact our work, right? So I think tracking the spending is very important. It's for transparency. Sometimes we talk a lot about our priorities, but if they're not in the budget, they're not really priorities, right? Because they have to be resourced. So I'm hoping we could discuss those two things, the recommendations from the Ontario Human Rights Commission, from impact to action, and the budget allocations to address anti-Black racism. Thank you.
Thanks so very much, Waleed. So first of all, we do work with the Toronto Police Service in terms of their action plan and how they're moving forward. We have started those discussions with them. So that's something that we can discuss, but we would suggest leaving it to the purview of the Toronto Police Service, but it's up to the purview of the committee to decide how it wants to move forward. As it relates to budget, each division, many of the divisions prioritize anti-Black racism, and we'll be taking those into budget. So once budget is decided, we'll see how those allocations are decided upon, and then we will continue working with divisions as we move into the next iteration of the action plan. We have been meeting with divisions on the year 5 accomplishments, and we're continuing to meet with them on what's the next iteration look like. And so once the budget is meted out, we will have continued discussions with them in consultation about how they will prioritize anti-Black racism in the next action plan. But I'll turn it to Milana if she wants to supplement that.
Thanks, Kemba, and thanks for the feedback, Waleed. So through the chair, I would just like to respond to 2 of those items. So I think it's very aligned with the theme around police and justice to look at ways to strengthen our understanding and work and in response to the ways in which Toronto Police Services engages in our communities. And so I think it is possible to explore having someone present from the Ontario Human Rights Commission on the report so that the committee is aware of those items, and then based on that could receive it for information or identify if there are aligned opportunities. As Kemba did mention, we do work closely with the Toronto Police Services, and we definitely expect to continue that partnership and collaboration in the next action plan. And so we'll definitely note, I've actually already noted that report, and we'll consider it in both of those processes. So thank you for raising that. Around the budget process, we actually have been fortunate that at this previous iteration of this committee to have the chief financial planner come and actually speak to that very question of how is anti-Black racism and how are benefits for Black communities actually being reflected in our budget, because of course budgets tell the story of priorities. So I think, as Kemba said, once the 2024 budget has been confirmed, we can definitely invite a presentation on that, so this committee is informed. Similarly, knock on wood, the development of a 10-year plan, we are hopeful to see ambitious investments in Black communities with coming out of the decade around what has been delivered. We also anticipate the presentation and report looking at the city's commitments and accomplishments around the decade to demonstrate some of that. So that can definitely be something we look at as well. But thank you so much for your feedback.
Thank you so much for incorporating those items. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Halimo, I think you had, no? Who had their hands up? I saw. Yes, go ahead, Queen.
I was here trying to type out some notes. Hi, everybody. Queen Kukoyi. So thank you so much for your presentation. I found the insights very valuable, but one thing I did find missing is discussion on Black artists. arts workers, arts organizations. They're often at the helm of lots of movements in regards to the themes I saw here, and I was just wondering, is it possible to, or if there's a plan to incorporate how the city can support Black artists, arts workers, and arts organizations?
Thank you so much for that, Queen. I think that's incredibly important, and not to put too much pressure on my colleagues who are here, but they're actually going to be speaking about some of the work that's underway and getting some of your input on the city's cultural sector strategy, if I'm saying that correctly. And so I think there is a couple of things. I think artists are often put in a box as someone who's worked in the arts and considers myself an artist, where they're also not thought of as entrepreneurs, as business people, right? You have to make a living. And so I think that it's about our opportunity for us to think about a lens of how are artists also storytellers? How do they fit into our, how we're thinking about the decade, and how do they fit into the support we're providing, whether there's microloans for different projects? So I agree with you, we didn't use the language of arts workers or artists, but I definitely think that's the lens we want you to bring. I know a number of you are connected to arts communities. So I actually really appreciate that and would ask, we could actually directly name that, or we could use that as a lens. So whichever, I would be happy to take that back. And I would also encourage us through the staff and the strategies we have come forward to name that. How are those areas brought forward? Did you want to speak to that, Kemba?
Yes, so I also wanted to add, this is the last year for the International Decade, and since that is a part of the platform of this particular committee, important to highlight that recognition that artists really are a part of how we recognize Black people, and inclusive of that is our artists are educators as well too, so that falls under the provision of education, and how within our communities, that artists are Black leaders, so thinking about that as we move forward too is what I want to suggest.
Would you like to respond just in your preference and how we integrate that?
I think it's important to first name it, because I think when this work plan goes public, I think a lot of Black artists might feel like their stories, their contributions are missing from this. And I think it's important to name it in this work plan and what supports may be in place or strategies may be in place to support Black artists.
Thank you for that.
Okay. Sorry, go ahead, Kathy. Thank you.
Kathy Moscow. Queen, thank you so much for raising that, because that's exactly what I was going to say. I would agree that it is important to actually name it. When I saw that missing when I was looking at it and made notes for myself, and whereas in looking through what is in the work plan currently, I was identifying for myself spaces in which to embed the arts and culture. It is also important to actually say that this is important. I really appreciate the comments that you made, because I was thinking, yes, this is certainly related to the economic plan and that artists are entrepreneurs, and yes, there are, spaces around even housing, and education that are important. But I think unless we actually name it, that it might get lost, and creatives will, at the end of the day, be underrepresented, I think, if it's not in the plan. And so that is my feedback. I had another comment in regards to healthcare, and wanted to say that the focus is so far in food insecurity and health-based climate change. However, I think that it is important to include maternal and neonatal mortality. There is disparities between Black women who are just overrepresented in maternal mortality, and this needs to be a focus, I think, of that. And just to clarify, as we are looking at disaggregated race-based data, just to be certain that we clarify that this is in order to measure the anti-Black racism, because historically we have used race-based data in order to that data has been used in order to try and show that there are biological differences between blacks and whites and others, and that's not how we want to use that data. So it's actually important to actually name that too.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Williams is next, and then we'll go to Ms. Thompson after.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the nice presentation. I just wanted to find out, are there some activities or programs in this current work plan that are similar to the previous work plans? If so, what have been the lessons learned in the previous programs, especially in terms of the lessons and metrics learned from implementation of those programs? Secondly, I was requesting to hear more about the health interventions, especially for the elderly. The black community is getting more old people who are missing services like geriatrics. Are there programs like in this work plan? I didn't hear much of that are directed to the black old community, but also in terms of addressing the barriers for newcomers in accessing healthcare.
Thank you, William, for your comments. So a couple of things. I'm maybe going to start with your last question, and then we can move to the former. So one of the strategies that we are recommending comes forward is from SSLT, the Senior Services and Long-Term Care, bringing forward their third iteration of the senior strategy. And so I think that's an opportunity to really drill down on what programs and services and supports are available. And so I think if you're interested in learning more about that, I think that is definitely a committee we're looking to, a strategy we're looking to bring forward and to understand more about interventions and impact this committee can drive. In addition to that, we're also looking at supporting various populations who are furthest away from supports through the new 10-year action plan. So that will be an area that we're looking to explore there, and would welcome, of course, all of you as committee members to be part of that process. In terms of looking at priorities of this last committee, so their work plan is also online and was shared with this committee for reference. But I think that, and similarly, their mandate areas were the same as yours. But the areas that committee focused more on were there was a heavy focus on employment and thinking about supports there, on health in relation to driving. At the time, COVID there was a lot of city work and support around vaccine equity and a COVID response, and so that was definitely a focus. And we were lucky enough to have presentations from Dr. Akwatu, who's chair of the Black Scientist Task Force at the time. The committee also focused on how to respond to challenges around Little Jamaica and supports for Black businesses as part of its economic development work. And I think those were the three real pillars of the work they were driving, in addition to thinking about broader strategic areas like, as I mentioned earlier, the city's impact and investment for Black communities, not just through COVID, but in recent years, and how they were measuring that. So those were some of the, I think, greater focus areas, in addition to making connections through the UN Permanent Forum on People of African Descent. So this committee has a slightly, I'd say, is building on some of those things, but actually has more of a targeted focus based on receiving more feedback from the committee early on. The last area that the committee did focus on was education. So we were really fortunate to have a number of folks, two of our returning members just on the end here, who have a lot of expertise in education as former teachers and as professors and anti-Black racism educators. And we had presentations really focused on how Black students were experiencing discrimination and streaming in the education system, about the challenges Black families were facing in terms of being able to push back and have accountability in that. So as I said, I think this committee, there's still connection to that work, but it's actually drilled down in other areas of focus. I don't know if you want to add anything, Kemba? Okay.
Okay, thank you. And Ms. Thompson?
Thank you. Newton Thompson.
Sorry.
Newton Thompson.
Newton Thompson, my apologies.
Can't leave out the Newton.
Newton Thompson, my apologies.
Oh, no problem. Thank you very much for the presentation. I just wanted to add something to the education and perhaps the policing. I noticed that streaming was mentioned. It's the streaming issue. And also, I think what's important to add there is guidance and counseling, because this has been a centuries-long issue for Black students in high schools in particular, so we really need to name that. And then also supports for professionals and students, Black professionals and students, because I think we are addressing, you know, having more educational Black educators, looking at the tokenism in hiring, and looking at promoting students in streams, well, de-streamed, but promoting them in the school system. But our students need support. We need social workers, and we need child and youth workers, and we need, because of their mental health, some of the mental health issues that come up in schools, and there aren't enough of those supports in schools. So I think we need to mention those things as well. And then the connection between school and prison. You know, lots of our youth are, you know, starting with even in kindergarten, you know, suspended and so on. And by the time they get into high school, we have, you know, a lot of issues around criminality and that sort of thing. And so to the interventions, again, if we have the professional social workers, child youth workers, I don't know why I have this frog in my throat, but it's there. So yes, I want to talk about that. And also, in terms of housing, home ownership, I noticed was mentioned. And I think that's important, because there is a segment of our population that's looking to own homes. Some are renters, some, you know, are. And then in housing also, I noticed you mentioned about the seniors, and there's a, maybe not a trend now, but a look at seniors living together in community. And so we can look at seniors, Black seniors living in, say, a co-op, or, thank you so much, some kind of housing that will bring our, because we're talking about aging in place. And so some discussion around seniors living together in a space and where it's culturally appropriate and they have the supports that they need. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Yes, thank you for that. Those are important, and we'll consider that as we move forward.
Okay. Dr. Daniel?
Morning, and thank you. So folks, thank you so much for that presentation. I have 3 areas that I'm wondering if you can speak to. Some of the emerging research is showing that there's a significant increase in suicidality and suicide amongst Black children and youth. And I'm wondering how that will be taken up, particularly under the health component of it. Because to date there is no data that specifically looks at those patterns. But again, the emerging research is showing that particularly Black youth who are taken into care and who are aging out of care, and the increased risk of suicidality and suicide ideation amongst that population. Secondly, and I think sort of building on Dr. Newton Thompson's comment about policing, I'm not seeing a clear indication in terms of what are the interventions to divert our populations. I'm seeing interventions sort of after the fact. And I think it's important for us to really think about how do we keep our youth and community members away from the justice system, as opposed to sort of closing the door after. And thirdly, in relation to the education component, I am a bit concerned, and perhaps it is not the purview of this committee, but I think we need to look at it from even an intergovernmental issue, post-secondary education pathways. We talk about K to 12, which is absolutely vital, but I think if we're going to see our community moving into and sitting at the tables where decisions are being made, we have to ensure that more of our young people are moving into the post-secondary education landscape. They are being provided with the supports that they need to effectively navigate those landscapes. And how do they move into appropriate career pathways that that allow for them to sit at the tables where decisions are being made? So perhaps if you can speak to those three areas.
Thank you so much, Dr. Daniel. We really appreciate your feedback. So in relation to the first item around suicidal ideation among Black children, particularly in care, I think that's an incredibly important point. So the first recommendation area under healthcare, I believe it says to track and provide strategic advice to enhance and target the city's mental health initiatives. So I'm not fully versed in all of the strategies that Toronto Public Health has, but I am aware there is a mental health support strategy that is really starting to get its legs now that the COVID response has lightened. And so I think that's a really great opportunity to invite them to come and actually specifically ask more about and understand how the city is intervening, particularly around suicidal ideation of young people and particularly around Black communities. So I think that's absolutely within scope within that area. So we would absolutely love to consider that more specifically. I also think this is an area we can continue to explore in the Toronto Action Plan, similarly to Kathy's comments regarding maternal health. Incredibly important, and I think requires both a longer term and a broader scope of reach than just recommendations to council in the purview of this committee. Around police interventions, SafeTO, which is the city's strategy that's working closely with the province, thinking about not only alternatives to policing, but interventions both upstream and post engagement with the criminal justice system, is a significant opportunity for this committee to consider and is on the agenda. So I think that's an area where we're definitely be requesting a presentation around diversion before they enter into the system. So I really do appreciate those comments. Did I answer everything? Oh, sorry, the last one about the post-secondary. Thank you. So I do think that there is an opportunity to bring this to this committee. We do have a shorter term than a normal committee because of the changes with council. And so what I would say is, in terms of being able to bring that issue in a fulsome way to this table, we may be limited, but I think that we can invite some post-secondary speakers to explore the opportunity, but there may be a recommendation to bring, I'd say, to council in terms of our partnerships of how we're working with intergovernmental partners, because I do think it is in many ways beyond the scope of the city's influence to think about how we're creating those tables at a post-secondary level.
You're going to read it. Let's read it.
Doesn't follow up to this point about child and youth suicidality. I wondered if one would expect that perhaps parenting support is also needed. Simple, for instance, being able to recognize and signs of stress and distress and knowing how to respond to it when you see it in your child or when you see it in your adolescents.
Absolutely, that's one of the gaps as well that we're seeing. But I would also argue that there needs to be a system of support that's in place for parents whose children have committed suicide or who have attempted suicide. And I hear the use of the term mental health, which is important, but I think it does not drill down effectively, particularly given that when we look at the US data, Black youth now have the highest rate of suicide amongst all populations. And that is a crisis in the US. And given COVID and everything else that's happened, anecdotally, we're seeing it emerging as a crisis here as well, but there's nothing in place to really deal with it. So we have families who are struggling and there's nothing in place for them.
Thank you. I think we had George first, George Amos, and then Lucinda. You didn't have your hands up? Okay, Lucinda, go ahead.
Thank you, Councillor Moise. Yeah, I have to echo, I think, all the comments that have already been shared. Some of the areas that I noted were missing have already been discussed. Particularly, I had thought of Black maternal health was a big one. But I think I have a general question or perhaps concern over like the role of advocacy that the unit plays and that committee members might play in influencing intergovernmental affairs or things that are like under the purview of other jurisdictions. So I'm particularly thinking about incarceration. So we're talking about upstream interventions and you know, we've requested supplemental funding to top up, you know, supports for refugee housing, education being under like a provincial purview, as well as child welfare. So I think it would be nice to see kind of like the clear linkages in the plan with how that is actually going to be achieved. I think like that intersectoral kind of collaborative piece is critical to advancing a lot of the items that we see in this plan. And so I want to know or kind of get a clear sense of that, like those processes to actually make these items feel like they're tangibly achievable. So that's one piece. And then I think also not just like intergovernmentally in different levels of government, but thinking also within like internal city areas, city bodies. Like when we talk about the TPS, I don't think it's enough to just say, you know, that's within their purview and we'll see like how they'll respond to certain recommendations from, you know, the Ontario Human Rights Commission. I think there's an advocacy piece that we should be leaning into, and I don't think that linkage is immediately clear right now. I want to be able to, as members, be able to advocate for that divestment and make that happen and have that explicitly noted in the plan. So I think that's just some reflections that I had, less of a question, but I definitely agree with what everyone has brought forward already.
Thanks so very much, Lucina. And yeah, we definitely hear that the scope of this particular committee is to make recommendations to City Council. And so in talking about work that specifically aims at the work of the Toronto Police Service, there could be an invitation to have them come and present. But again, there isn't ways in which we can advocate in the way that you're speaking to as a committee. But we also can take recommendations as well and share them with in our meetings with TPS. So the invitation there is if there is a desire to have TPS come and present so that you can make recommendations to City Council, we can make that happen.
Okay, thank you. I think most people have spoken already, so I have a few comments. We'll see if there's the room for a second round. So I do have a few notes here. And a lot of it has been touched upon already, but for example, post-secondary, when I was a school board trustee, I actively went into the universities and tried to get the Black kids into mentorship programs so they could actually be in the space and feel comfortable in it. When I went to university, I only stepped into the classroom when I actually attended my first day. And in my role as councillor, I'm fortunate enough to meet with the TMU president and York president and OCAD and U of T presidents, and I actually convey that to them when I meet with them. So perhaps we can make space here to actually make that a formal something. I know we talk about mental health here, but we haven't really touched about physical health. I attended the first Black Health Conference last year, and to my surprise, I learned that Black men have the highest rate of prostate cancer deaths in the world. And also Black women have a high rate of breast cancer and deaths in the world because they don't go into those spaces, don't feel comfortable in those spaces, don't feel safe in those spaces, so therefore they don't go into it. And so perhaps that's something that we can touch on. I know that this is a provincial responsibility, but there's perhaps some space here for us to talk about that and put it in our plan. Small businesses, for example, we saw what happened with Little Jamaica. Even though there's Black businesses across the city, very few of them actually own the properties they actually reside in, and so they could be asked to leave at any point in time. So perhaps land trusts is something we can continue to talk about. I know we touched on it in the last session, but I think it's a conversation we need to continue to have. I know, for example, the city also gave grants to small businesses during COVID, but they give those grants to landlords. And a lot of the grants did not reach the actual business owner themselves. And that is something perhaps we should look at going forward. I know Councillor Bradford just yesterday mentioned that perhaps in this budget, 2024, we should actually look into giving grants to small businesses to help them. But yet, he hasn't mentioned the hurdles of the last time we did that. So that's a separate conversation altogether. But perhaps those are things we could look at in the work plan when we finally put it together. Those are my comments. You could actually comment on it or not comment on it.
I think those are good suggestions that we can take back.
Okay, thank you. Is there a will for the committee to have a second round? Okay, there isn't one, but I'll allow, okay, sure. Wally, go ahead. 3 minutes to come around, please, because we have a long agenda.
Thank you so much. I just want to acknowledge the comment made by Charis Newton Thompson. Thank you, Charis. And Charis talked about housing when it comes to home ownership. And it's actually, this is very important to me, and it's very interesting. I don't think we have data on how many Black residents in the city of Toronto own their homes, and how many are on a pathway to home ownership, and whether they qualify for home ownership. So what I would like for us to explore, and I'll give you some context, is in Regent Park, my home, for phases 1 to 3, there was a commitment to not displace residents, to do everything possible to avoid gentrification. And when you look at the data that Toronto Community Housing actually shared with us, take this in, only 17 residents accessed home ownership. Only 17 TCHC families access home ownership through the boost and foundational programs incentivized by our federal and provincial government. And hundreds of folks who did not live in the community were able to, benefit through home ownership, and actually were able to profit from the speculation in the housing market, because they bought homes at $300,000 and now they're worth $1.2 million, right? So I'm hoping that we could also explore what are the policies, what are the investments being made to help Black families or Black residents in the city of Toronto access home ownership. And that will require an analysis of the role of financial institutions. There's anti-Black racism within our banking system. We have Black residents in our community being denied mortgages or loans, or they don't qualify for home ownership. So this is really important. If it's systemic in nature and we can capture it, we can recommend to council policies that will help incentivize home ownership for Black residents of Toronto. And I think it's a human rights issue, because, without access to home ownership, there will be displacement. We know that, right? So I just was hoping that we could include that in the housing priority of the work plan. Thank you. Thanks, Councillor Moise.
Okay, thank you. Other questions?
Councillor, do you mind if I quickly respond to that?
Sure, go ahead.
So we are looking at these issues already, and you're correct, there isn't any Toronto-specific data, and so we are working with our colleagues, as we mentioned previously, in the Housing Secretariat and CMHC, TCHC, to look at some of these, and they'll be brought forward to this committee through the Black Housing Framework, which is already identified within the action, so that there's great alignment there. Thank you, Waleed.
Okay, thank you. Queen Koyoshi?
Kukoyi.
I'm trying.
It's okay, our tongues are colonized. I just wanted to, there was a part that I forgot earlier. I just wanted to add specifically, and I mean, I'm free to discuss this more as well too, as a part of our stance with Outside Arts is very much to advocate for Black artists in the public art sector. As artists in the public art sector, trying to get into permanent public art is a challenge. It's often architectural firms, specifically white architectural firms, that get these calls. There was a call recently with Moss Park that was really well done, but I do have some critiques on it in terms of new artists trying to break into the public art sector. So I wanted to also make sure that that was a part of the conversation when it comes to Black artists.
Yeah, thank you so very much for that. I think we can look at including that, as Milana was speaking to, in the employment and entrepreneurship realm.
And I'd also like to say that our colleagues are here and they will be talking about that. So this is some of this feedback, give it directly to them because they've got the power to really embed it in much broader strategies and impacts. So really just want to express our gratitude for the discussion at the committee and the great feedback.
Yeah, thank you. Newton Thompson? Ms.
Thank you, Councillor Moise. You got it right. Okay, I forgot something as well. I think it was Melania. Is it Melania? Melania. You mentioned, you were talking about moving away from slavery in the history curriculum, and I just wanted to address that a little bit. I noticed recently the minister was over in Brampton talking about starting discussions around African history. I call it African history because all history is African history. So what I wanted to say about that, because you mentioned moving away from slavery and enslavement, and I want to urge that we don't move away from slavery and enslavement, but we contextualize it, because it's only a small part of our history. So we need to go back, like Sankofa, and see our origins, which is the origins of everybody, and come forward and include that and go past that. Because I think enslavement was something that happened to us as Africans, and we had ways of, fighting that and developing resilience and all that, and we cannot leave that out. We need to include that, but contextualize it.
Dr. Newton Thompson, thank you so very much for that. It's specifically our intent to expand as opposed to excludes, but thank you very much for clarifying that.
Thank you so much. And Halima Kushi?
Hashi, thank you. I just wanted to say, thank you for your presentation. In terms of the impact, I think it's really clear the importance of collecting desegregated race-based data. I strongly align with the idea that if you're not counted, you don't count. But I just wanted to also highlight the importance of collecting qualitative data as well to include, honor, and amplify the stories of Black Torontonians, especially those who don't necessarily have the privilege or the time to access spaces such as this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And I think that ends our speakers list. I forgot to mention there's coffee and snacks over here, so please do help yourself. And I think it's courtesy of you guys. We'll move on to speakers. Any speakers on this item? Okay, seeing none, I just want to say thank you to the staff and to everyone here for contributing not only today, but also to previously putting this together. So I think we've given staff a lot of work to take back and to come forth with at some point. Do you have a date when you're going to come back with this?
Councillor, the recommendation would be that we'd actually take, we think it aligns with all of the recommendations and that we actually approve this with the recommendations that committee members have put forward.
Okay, wonderful. So go ahead, Wally.
I just wanted to move that we adopt the work plan with the recommendations made by members of CABRAC, and thank you so much for your diligence. I'm really impressed. Thank you.
Okay, all those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. Wonderful. I'm gonna actually.
Well said. They did a good job.
It's very thorough.
Very thorough.
We're actually going to defer item number 5, which is increasing equity and access, social policy strategies and initiatives at the City of Toronto. We have a very long agenda today, and we're running behind, so I'm going to ask that we defer that. And Lucina, you want to move the deferral? Okay, all those in favor of deferral? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. So the next item is item CR 2.2, Economic Development and Culture 2024 Strategic Planning, an overview of 3 key strategic plan. As outlined in the work plan discussion and in the mandate of the committee, economic, we call it ECDC here, and specifically employment and entrepreneurship are critical strategic focus of this committee. So we are pleased to welcome a number of forthcoming economic development and cultural strategies to present to us today. They could introduce themselves as we go along. So you have the floor. Go ahead.
Thank you so much, Councillor Moise. Good morning, everyone. My name is Shirley Hudson-Hill, and my pronouns are she and her, and I am an acting policy development officer with the Economic Development and Culture Division, also referred to as EDC. Today, EDC staff will provide an overview of 3 key strategic plans being developed for the consideration of City Council in fall 2024. These include the EDC Divisional Strategy 2024 to 2028, the Action Plan for Toronto's Culture Sector, and the Action Plan for Toronto's Economy. This will include an outline of the strategy's respective public engagement processes and an opportunity for the committee to provide early feedback. It is my pleasure to present today with 2 of my EDC colleagues who will introduce themselves.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ben McIntosh. My pronouns are he and him. I'm the manager of cultural partnerships with the city's Economic Development and Culture Division. I'll be mostly speaking to you today about the culture plan. And Queen and Kathy, I loved your questions in the previous session. We're very much on the same wavelength, so I'm looking forward to chatting more about some of those areas today.
Hi, everyone. My name is Adam Didich. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm a policy development officer in the Economic Development and Culture Division. I'm co-leading the action plan for Toronto's economy with my colleague who unfortunately wasn't able to be here today. His name is Corey Shankman. Thank you, and I'll pass it off to Shirley.
Thank you so much, Adam and Ben. In today's presentation, we will review EDC's mandate and work. We'll provide examples of current EDC work forwarding the Confronting Anti-Black Racism Action Plan. We'll share an overview of the 3 EDC strategies being developed in 2024, and we'll also share what we've heard in recent engagements with Black communities. And of course, the main reason we're here is to listen to you and hear your feedback on what you hear today. So the Economic Development and Culture is a division within the City of Toronto, and we we lead a broad range of activities, and that includes programs, supports, events, services, all related to our 5 sections. So these sections include business growth services, film and entertainment industries, arts and culture services, museum and heritage services, as well as program support. Our mandate at EDC is to make Toronto a place where business and culture thrive. The division's objective is to advance Toronto's prosperity, opportunity, and livability by fostering employment and investment opportunities, encouraging Toronto's cultural vibrancy, and engaging partners in the planning of the city's economic and cultural resources. I wanted to give you a brief overview of EDC's work, just to give you a sense of what this work actually looks like on the ground. EDC's work includes business improvement, or BIA area offices, so that's governance, oversight, expansion, financial incentive programs. Our work also includes Main Street initiatives, and most recently that's Main Street recovery and rebuild initiatives, programs like Cafe TO and Plaza Pops. And as we also include entrepreneurship services. That includes everything from webinars, business info, summer company youth grants, business incubation grants, and commercialization. EDC also includes film and entertainment services. So that's supports for the film and television sector, everything from permitting workforce development, permitting, to film permitting, workforce development initiatives, and there's also in that area the music office, which nurtures the city's music community through policy recommendations and advocacy. There's also support for large festivals, events, and conventions. Our visitor economy area, formerly known as tourism, supports everything from labor force services, that includes food services, accommodation, retail, all sorts of things in that area. We also, very importantly, have arts and cultural and museum programming events. So that includes large cultural events such as Doors Open, Nuit Blanche, you may know those, and a diverse number of arts and heritage programming across city-owned facilities. That includes 3 cultural centers, 5 galleries, and 10 museums and historic sites all over Toronto. As part of the research for the divisional strategy and the other EDC strategies, we reviewed EDC's actions as they relate to the Toronto Action Plan to confront anti-Black racism. And in this plan, EDC commits to work on specific actions every year with an ongoing focus on inclusive economic development. So I just wanted to give you a sense, again, to just get you kind of accustomed to some of the supports and actions that EDC does in collaboration with the Confronting Anti-Black Racism Unit and many other city divisions and areas. So for example, there is the Cultural Hotspots program, and in 2023 that was Little Jamaica and Jane and Finch, and that was $200,000 of grant funding for Little Jamaica artists, businesses, and agencies, and $45,000 for Jane Finch. Our BIA's office also supported the Little Jamaica Corridor Project and the Little Jamaica Master Plan, and that was working with the FedDev Ontario program to direct $1 million of investment. There's also the Digital Media Zone, known as DMZ or DMZ, the Black Innovation Program at TMU, and that includes business and incubation and commercialization grants of up to $50,000, and support for Little Jamaica's Afro-Caribbean Farmers Market as well. In terms of other ongoing job opportunities in income supports and supporting that part of the action plan, there has been recently the Entertainment Trades Program with the C Center for Young Black Professionals, and that included training young Black Torontonians in the film and television trade, in things like construction, grip, electric. There's also been support for incubation and capacity building and mentorship leadership programming for 6 Indigenous, Black, and people of color focused arts organization through the Youth Cultural Incubators Stabilization Initiative. And there's a myriad of programs at city-run cultural centers, but one I thought I'd highlight today is the Black Girls Film Camp, a 10-day film education for Black youth led by Ella Cooper, and I think that's happening again in 2024, or that's what they're hoping for anyway. And Arts and Culture Services also opened a new public gallery called the Ascent Gallery at the Etobicoke Civic Center that focused exclusively on showcasing and supporting early career Indigenous, Black, and people of color artists. You may have also seen out there in the ether the wonderful work of the museum's Awakenings Mentorship Program, which last year was led by curator and creative director Ashley Mackenzie Barnes, and that program in 2023 had over 60% of Black mentees. In terms of accessible and welcoming city spaces and investments in Black arts and culture, which has already been a topic of discussion today, a major thing that's happening, which is probably on your radar, is the Blackhurst Cultural Center. So EDC is supporting the Confronting Anti-Black Racism Unit, city planning, heritage, strategic partnerships in developing a 3-story purpose-built Black community cultural center on city-owned land in Mirvish Village. And Blackhurst will provide permanent, affordable, and accessible space for artistic and cultural production in Toronto, and provide opportunities to experience the rich culture and history of Canadians of African and Caribbean ancestry. And the latest update is they're very close to signing the lease. That was my update from last week, and construction is slated to begin this year. There's also the Toronto Arts Council's Black Arts Program, open to Black artists, collectives, and organizations working in any discipline. And you may have also seen recently in 2023 a variety of work coming out of Toronto History Museums, including the Black Food Sovereignty Programming in 2022, which focused on Little Jamaica and was curated by the wonderful Lori Beezer, the head of the Afro-Caribbean Farmers Market in Little Jamaica. We also had Emancipation Day programming in 2022 and 2023, led by the Ontario Black History Society at Fort York National Historic Site, and the absolutely amazing Afrofuturist Dismantle exhibition in 2022-2023 that showcased local Black history and culture, featuring the works of Gordon Shadrach, Elixir, and others. And I'm not sure if anyone was able to attend. In October 2023, museums also hosted a weekend of programming marking the 200th anniversary of the birth of Marianne Shad Carey. So that's a snapshot, a high overview, just to give you a sense of the work that EDC does. Now I'd like to take you into those 3 EDC strategies that we will be bringing forth for the consideration of the Economic Community Development Committee, also known as ECDC, and City Council later this year. The 3 strategies that you see here, the divisional strategy, the action plan for Toronto's culture sector, and the action plan for Toronto's economy, are very much interconnected. We're sharing data through our engagement processes, and we're aligning all our directions. We're also aligning with other existing City of Toronto action plans and strategy, including the Confronting Anti-Black Racism Plan and the work that the Confronting Anti-Black Racism that team is doing on the new plan. And my colleagues in EDC are also in the midst of working on an inclusive economic development strategy report that is planning to go to council early this year. These strategies build, of course, on previous EDC strategies, previous economic and cultural action plans, a divisional strategy, and the EDC division is currently working under the council-approved strategic directions for 2022-2023. The 3 EDC strategies each serve a specific purpose and have their own respective engagement plans, and today we'll outline the strategies of these public engagement processes for you. The action plan for Toronto's culture sector, which is a 10-year plan, sets priorities for city policies and programs in support of arts and culture with an emphasis on access, inclusion, and equity. The Action Plan for Toronto's Economy, also a 10-year plan, establishes how the city coordinates existing and new levers to enhance Toronto's competitiveness while supporting more inclusive, sustainable, and impactful economic growth in communities and neighborhoods across Toronto. And the EDC divisional strategy, I'm the project lead for that one, will establish strategic directions as well as goals and actions to guide all divisional programs, policies, and services. Just getting straight into the engagement plan, I wanted to give you an overview of what we've been doing on the divisional strategy specifically. We have, while we will be very much informed by the extensive public engagement undertaken by the other two strategies, which Ben and Adam will speak to in a minute, to date, we have done our own targeted engagements with external they're city affiliated, but they're external advisory groups. So we had a meeting with the Toronto Youth Cabinet, and those are Torontonians aged 13 to 24. We met with the Lived Experience Advisory Group, and that group guides the city's poverty reduction strategy. And then in early December, we were also fortunate enough to meet with the Partnership and Accountability Circle, and that supports the Toronto Action Plan to confront anti-Black racism. As the divisional strategy is an internal plan, we have also had extensive internal consultations with EDC staff and other internal stakeholders. Now I'm going to turn it over to Adam to speak to the Action Plan for Toronto's Economy.
Thanks, Shirley. So in terms of engagement, the Action Plan for Toronto's Economy has 3 general engagement touchpoints. First, through an economic advisory panel. Second, through a public survey. And 3, through dedicated sector-specific public engagement sessions, the latter of which is largely being supported by our consultant, the Canadian Urban Institute. The economic advisory panel included approximately 26 industry leaders and subject matter experts across Toronto-focused organizations who provided advice from a variety of different and intersectional subject matter perspectives. A public survey launched approximately 2 weeks ago and is currently live on 2 city websites, Have Your Say and the Action Plan for Toronto's Economy landing page. This survey gives the public an opportunity to provide feedback that can inform the development of the Action Plan for Toronto's economy. Thirdly, dedicated public engagement sessions continue to provide insight from a wide variety of small business owners, business associations, and cultural organizations to also provide feedback to inform the development of the Action Plan for Toronto's economy. Some organizations that have provided feedback are the Black Business Professional Association, Assist Toronto, and Tropicana Community Services, and we're continuing to reach out to other organizations as well. And with that, I'll turn it back to my colleague Ben, who will provide an overview of engagement for the Action Plan for the culture sector. Thank you. Over to you, Ben.
Great, thanks, Adam. So for the Action Plan for Toronto's culture sector, we're working with an amazing engagement firm, our friends at Monumental Projects, who are led by Kofi Hope and Zara Ibrahim, to put together an inclusive community engagement process to help inform this plan. So as Shirley noted, this plan is really about how do we better support culture in Toronto. That includes both how we support artists and cultural organizations, but also how we improve opportunities for residents to be able to engage with culture no matter where they live in the city all year round. So we have a big, ambitious mandate, and we put together a consultation plan that we hope can bring in a lot of different diverse voices to inform what priorities ultimately go into this. We kicked off our engagement with a series of community conversations. So these were smaller focus group style events where we held some deeper conversations about key issues that are facing culture in Toronto. The first of these 3 were held with specific communities. So we did a session with Indigenous artists and creatives. We did one with Black artists and creatives, and I'll speak a little bit to their feedback shortly, and one also with deaf and disabled artists and creatives. These initial sessions were used to identify some key cross-cutting issues that we knew we needed to keep in mind as we're going through and developing the plan and engaging with other communities. We also hosted 5 conversations that were themed around key issues that we know are out there. Access to affordable cultural space, for example, is a really big issue in the sector right now. No surprise with rising property costs in the city, that's very difficult for artists and creatives to find places to live and work. So we wanted to make sure we had space for that conversation. We also had a conversation about the impact of technology on the arts. There's a lot of issues arising from development of AI technologies and other things that are changing the way artists and creatives work in the city, and we wanted to be able to explore that as well. In addition, we hosted sessions about the continued recovery and rebuild after the COVID pandemic, and how arts and culture can be a catalyst for change in communities. We're also hosting a lot of broader public opportunities, so we really want anyone who's interested to be able to have an opportunity to provide feedback where they can. Next week, we have 2 virtual town halls coming up, one on February 15th and one on February 22nd, so we encourage you to attend, tell your friends, help get the word out. And we also have an online survey that will be open until March 3rd for, again, anyone to provide input. In addition, we've engaged 5 artists who led community events across the city. So we selected artists who are active in different areas of the city, provided them with sort of overall context and goals, and invited them to design an event that they thought would work well for their local communities, to seek feedback on what matters to their neighborhoods related to culture. We found this a really interesting, effective way to engage people who don't normally come to consultations by making it more of an event-style thing. So we're really pleased with the feedback that we heard coming out of that. In addition, we also have a community conversation toolkit that's available on the city's website. So anyone who's interested can use this guide to host their own community event to seek feedback on culture and share their information back with the city. And lastly, we've also got an external advisory panel who are helping to inform this project that includes 20 community leaders from across the sector. And they're going to be helping the city to dig into all the rich information we've got out of the consultation plan to figure out where we go next in terms of setting priorities for this plan. I'll also briefly speak to our engagement with council advisory bodies such as yourself. So we're having an initial round of visits to committees early in the process to share our engagement plans and some of the initial directions that we're thinking. Later in the process, once we have some more formed recommendations to the plan, we'll come back to these committees to seek your feedback and make sure that we're identifying actions in the plan that make sense for your communities. To date, we've held sessions with the 2S LGBTQ+ Advisory Committee, the Toronto Accessibility Advisory Committee. We'll be attending the Indigenous Affairs Committee at a future date, as well as other council advisory bodies, including the Film Board and the Music Industry Advisory Committee. In terms of the project timelines, these 3 strategies are being developed in tandem, and that's also allowing us to share feedback across the projects. If you look at aspects of the culture sector like film or music, for example, they really straddle both the culture plan and the economic development plan. So there's a lot of related feedback that we're sharing as project teams. But we're intending to bring all 3 ultimately towards council approval in the fall. So the next few months will involve a lot of continued engagement and working on developing the actual recommendations for the plan. We'll also speak to a little bit of what we've heard so far.
Okay. So we've been gathering feedback from our current engagement activities, and as Ben mentioned, this will be informing all 3 EDC strategies. Feedback has been gathered from engagement with Black artists and creatives, the Confronting Anti-Black Racism's Partnership and Accountability Circle, and that happened throughout November and December, and as you just heard, is ongoing, and we will continue to gather this feedback through the next few months for all 3 strategies. Ben, what did we hear in the conversations with Black artists and creatives?
All right, so some of the key issues we've heard so far. I mentioned earlier around the lack of affordable, accessible space for arts and culture in the city. Mm-hmm. It's a huge issue, as we all know. Not just about where artists can work, but also where they live. We know there's a risk of displacement. We're hearing a lot of artists leaving the city to more affordable regions outside of Toronto. So we really need to be deliberate about what we can do to make sure that we maintain a healthy ecosystem for artists in the creative sector in Toronto. We've also heard about an inequitable distribution of arts funding across the city. So historically, there's been a lot of investment in large cultural institutions and institutions located in the downtown core. By contrast, the City and Toronto Arts Council don't have as much resources to be able to invest in new and emerging organizations, particularly those located outside the core or those serving Indigenous, Black, and equity-deserving communities. So we're very much aware of this lens and historic funding pattern and want to look at strategies for how we can change that and make sure that we are making the decisions to allow new and emerging organizations to have the resources they need to grow and sustain their practices. We also hear a lot about city processes, so no surprise perhaps to the artists around the table, but we've heard that grant and applications and reporting processes are difficult. So what can we do to make the process for accessing city funding and resources easier for folks? We've also heard about a need to have more diverse types of grant funding that supports more types of experimentation and maybe isn't limited to the more rigid disciplines that the City and Toronto Arts Council have used in the past. And to Queen's earlier point, we've heard a lot about the need for more capacity building and mentorship opportunities. Your example of public art is a really perfect example of the kind of culture sector support where we need to explore more of that. It's a field with really high barriers to entry. So there's a lot of technical training required to successfully do public art. So we've started experimenting with a few models, such as doing design-only contracts, where we can hire an artist to come up with a design, and then the city can work on the construction side. We're also going to be running a new mentorship program this year through the Toronto Sculpture Garden, where artists are going to be engaged to do temporary public art projects as a step up towards learning to do permanent commissions. This will just be a very initial starting point. There's a lot more we need to do on this, and we're excited to dig into it as part of the plan.
In the engagement sessions we held with the Partnership and Accountability Circle, and as well as feedback gleaned through economic advisory panel sessions in the fall, we also heard, and it's an affirmation of a lot of the research and work that's ongoing, but really the bottom line is prioritize inclusive economic development that touches neighborhoods all across the city. Downtown core, of course, but this city is so big and diverse and wonderful. What does an inclusive economic development, what does that look like in neighborhoods across Toronto? Augmented funding and support's very important, as well as access to information. So we heard a lot about access to space, but also information, and also trying to address the gaps in providing additional supports for women and Black entrepreneurs. So vital. We heard, just like Ben did in the culture plan engagements, about inclusive funding applications processes and trying to make those much more inclusive. And the deteriorating affordability and those ongoing systemic barriers continue to be the central economic challenges for Black communities. And to try to counter that, we need to build stronger connections between the grants and supports offered to entrepreneurs and small businesses and Toronto's diverse and highly skilled talent pool. So that's enough for us. You've been very kind and very generous with your time today. We really appreciate it. But we would, at this moment, like to close our presentation by asking you questions to start the feedback. We'd love to hear, do the challenges and issues that we've heard to date resonate with you and your experience? And similar to the questions by the first agenda item, based on your experience, what's missing? What else should we be paying attention to? And thank you so much for your time today.
Yeah, thank you. So before we proceed in-house to committee members, we do have one deputation. So if you don't mind just parting the waves, allowing the deputant to come and depute. Zachariah Abdullah.
Thank you so much, Councillor. I can confirm your tongue is not colonized.
Thank you. Mind you, we're all speaking English, so we're all colonized. I digress. You have 5 minutes.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. I don't think I'll be using the microphone, as I'm geeked and excited to have the opportunity to quickly share remarks on behalf of the Somali Center for Culture and Recreation. As Councillor Moise, the chair of the Anti-Black Advisory Committee, mentioned, my name is Zachary Abdul, and I have the esteemed privilege of not only being a proud Black father of 3 beautiful little girls in the city of Toronto, but I also have a privilege of working on behalf of a 40-year-long advocacy effort on behalf of one of the larger Black communities in Toronto, the Somali community. I'm here to Depew to share not only a bit of the progress to date on establishing the Somali Center for Culture and Recreation, but I also want to share some feedback to our incredible colleagues from EDC who discuss the work they're doing to support the Black culture and arts sector. We're a social purpose real estate nonprofit organization, and much of what we learned to date is the principles of Sankofa, where you have to go back in your history to learn how to move forward in your future. And we learned that the advocacy to establish a Somali Center for Culture and Recreation actually began in the 1970s. And I remember when first hearing this from an elder, I got so emotional. I felt like my histories and culture were being erased. Much of the frustration that we collectively feel across Black communities. And that was the first elder I spoke to in the summer of 2022. Soon thereafter, we spoke to another elder who spoke to me about a letter he still has on his old Macintosh laptop, dated September 11, 1990, where he requested the City of Toronto and many nonprofit organizations to help him establish a Somali Women's Center and a Somali Cultural Center to support the influx of refugees that were fleeing from the war across East Africa. That was my second conversation. I then moved to a third conversation with another member of the community, where they indicated there was an attempt in 1998 with some members that are on council today to then again in the Rexdale area, Northwest Quadrant, where we just heard of significant gaps when it comes to Black culture and arts. There was another attempt to establish a Somali Center for Culture and Recreation. Unfortunately, it didn't work out for many reasons. I then spoke to a fourth person in the community, a bit of an elder as well. In 2005, during the Summer of the Gun, a period of time where Black youth were being gunned down, where crime was reaching epic levels, and young people who are Black were being marginalized, including in the Somali community. There was another attempt to do culture and recreation work. And now we're here in 2024, the end of the UN People of African Descent. And what I would share with my colleagues at EDC is this past September of 2023, we partnered with the City of Toronto to complete a Black culture and arts exhibit called Dis Bulshada. And during this exhibit, we had more than 15,000 members, not only from the Black communities and the brilliance and the beautiful brilliance that we have across our Black communities, but we partnered with Union Station and we had 15,000 members across the City of Toronto attend. There was a line all the way up, almost to Yonge and Front. And it showed the level of demand for Black culture and art. This whole exhibition was self-financed by the Somali community. We did not rely on EDC. We did not rely on resources from the City of Toronto. The community came up with those resources. And a part of that Black culture and art show is the communities across Toronto have asked for more. Tonight, we're doing a Somali Heritage Night show on February of the TDSB. And a part of that is from the TDSB's Black Center for Excellence. Why am I saying this? When you come from Black communities, institutions and the legacies of colonialism try to force us under one bucket. This does not happen to European communities. This does not happen to Asian communities. And on the journey of trying to work to establish this space, the Somali Center, on this journey to try to bring a 40-year legacy forward, we have constantly faced attempts to put us in this bucket of erasure and of legacies of colonialism. You could hear it in my voice of how frustrating it's been to date. I don't see this from colleagues from the Asian community. I don't see this from colleagues in the European community. And a part of this research, we're speaking not only from our lived experiences, because question number 2 on that slide deck was, based on your experiences, and that's what I'm speaking to now, based on our experiences to date, we've learned that there are a lack of Black cultural and art spaces across the City of Toronto. You can look it up. We published a report called Inhibited Growth with the University of Toronto's Infrastructure Institute that was published in December 2022. I remember working late that night on some of the edits of that report, and I said, wow, I can't believe this. As I talked to my friends and my mentors from the Caribbean community, from the Nigerian community, from the Ghanaian community, many who immigrated decades ago, and I asked, why is it that we have not been able to have spaces to celebrate our beautiful culture and arts? Why is it missing? Why are we always fractioned off into little small sections? And that's why I want to end and conclude many of my remarks by applauding Councillor Moise. We should all give him a round of applause. but also applauding this anti-Black racism advisory committee. And I know there's an item on Sankofa Park later, but when you are able to change the name of a public asset and put a name as important as Sankofa Park that speaks to the principles of coming together and building the histories before us to the future, what you're telling people from across our communities, and I don't speak for everyone, is that they should be taking part in public spaces. They should have an active role in our democracy. And what I'm encouraging EDC to do as they continue their engagement is, we'd love to chat with you further about what we've learned during our Nuit Blanche art exhibition. But I also would love to continue this conversation in the months to come with this incredible anti-Black racism advisory committee as we think of extending the UN People of African Decade of Descent. We heard from Prime Minister Trudeau, I believe a couple of days ago, where he made an announcement at the federal government that they will extend it to 2028. Thank you so much for the opportunity to depute. That's all from me for now. Thank you.
Thank you. I allowed you just in a minute extra because what you're saying, it was really important and resonated with all of us here today. Any questions for the deputant? Seeing none, thank you so much for coming in today, Zachariah.
Thank you again. Thank you all. And happy Black History Month.
And to you. We'll get staff back to the table, and we'll start off with Ms. Newton-Thompson. You have 5 minutes. Go ahead.
Ms. Newton-Thompson.
Yes, we'll work our way down to... Yes, go ahead.
Thank you, Councillor Moise, and thank you for your presentation. And I just want to speak to the question that you're asking based on our experience, what do we have to add? And I am going historically. When I was the president of the Congress of Black Women Toronto chapter back in the 80s, we applied for a grant to put out a film called Children Are Not the Problem, an anti-racist film. And we just had the hardest time getting funding. Everywhere we went, you know, I don't know, you know, we were talking about anti-racism, so people were saying they're not racist or whatever their reason were. But we just had the most difficult time getting funding. We finally did, but we just had the most difficult time. And what I want to say to add to your list of comments is that grant funding, as from my experience in Toronto, does not support culturally relevant art projects. What it does is it defines what you should be doing. And so what you define is not necessarily what is culturally relevant or important to particular groups. So it needs to open itself a little bit more to let people make suggestions. And I know it's said about creativity and all of that, but it's cultural relevance. It's what's appropriate for the particular community at that given time. Because when we're going for funding, we're going to fund something that we think we really need. So by the time the city catches up, it might be 10 years later or more. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Do you want to respond or you're good?
I'd like to, through the chair to the member, I'd like to thank you so much for that. And I would like to prioritize listening to the committee because I know we're tight on time unless, in terms of that feedback, unless a direct response is required.
Okay. Thank you. Queen, I think you had your hand up, right?
I was interested, and maybe this isn't the place to discuss this, maybe we can discuss this after, but I was interested to know more about the process in which you are doing the garden, and how it will be broken down to support specifically Black and Indigenous artists in the process and leading them up to permanent public art as an organization outside arts. A collective as well. We've had a lot of challenges with calls, like doing calls, because we're learning as we go. And the folks who have trusted us to do permanent and temporary public art were folks that realize we have the capacity to learn and grow as an organization, as an arts collective. So I was interested in knowing what steps, what process you're taking to include things like, finding fabricators and the different elements to permanent public art in correlation to the garden.
Thank you for the question on that. So the way we're looking at developing this program is, so it's not just going to be about creating a piece of temporary public art to go in the garden, but we have a series of learning modules that we're going to be doing it with a cohort of artists together. And we're going to be covering things like how to apply for public art opportunities, how to find the fabricators and partners. So we really want it to be obviously a course that accompanies the actual commissioning opportunity. Would love to chat with you more offline about this. So happy to connect you with our staff who are leading the project.
Thank you for that. We've actually been hired by the town of Aurora to do something very similar, so it'd be good to talk after.
Okay, thank you. Halimo Hashi.
Thank you so much, Chair. Thank you so much for your presentation. I think this speaks more to question number 2. I wanted to ask, with elders being such a rich source of culture, history, talent, and experience, if you could speak to participation and engagement with Black seniors specifically.
I'm going to throw that question to Ben, as they're in the throes of the most extensive engagement process.
Well, we've been trying to be really deliberate as possible in making sure we're extending invitations to a cross-section of demographics, including seniors, youth. So it's something that's very much top of mind for us. Once we are approaching the end of our process, we are going to be taking a look at the demographics of everyone who participated and identify whether there are gaps. And you've raised a really important one, and I think we're going to have to pay additional attention to and maybe do some further engagement towards the end of the process.
Okay, thank you. Walid?
Thank you for your amazing presentation. I was actually taking notes while you were speaking as well. I just was hoping you could talk to us about, the importance of investments that are happening right now through social development plans. I know in Regent Park we have one in Lawrence Heights, we have one in Alexandra Park. And in Regent Park, one of our working groups is called Employment and Economic Development. And what we're trying to do is make sure that local residents have access to good jobs, that they're on a career path. We've learned there's a lot of barriers for that. One being local policies, policies by our stakeholders or agencies that operate in Regent Park and other neighborhoods to hire locally. Right, so I want to have a better understanding of how do you approach the policy work, the policy-driven work, because that's very important. It's not just about money; it's like practices. The second thing that I was hoping you could talk about is how are we better supporting youth and vulnerable members of our community access economic opportunities across the city of Toronto. With an emphasis on mentorship, but also financing, right? One of the things we're talking about is systemic barriers when it comes to accessing loans or accessing funding. And I didn't capture that I didn't get that from your presentation, so I'd love for you to share those details as well. Again, thank you for the work you do, and I hope we could work together to address some of our priorities.
All right, so on the first part of your question, so there are a lot of really important community development plans underway right now. You mentioned Regent Park. We've been doing a lot of work in Little Jamaica. There's a community development plan underway for Jane Finch as well. these are projects where we really need to have an all-of-city approach to make sure that we're addressing community needs on multiple different fronts. So our immediate team here isn't personally leading those projects, but what we want to make sure is that any initiatives that we're delivering are very much aligned with the community's goals. So whether it's informing the local employment policies or addressing space needs for community organizations, we really have to make sure that any incentive programs that we offer as the Economic Development and Culture Division can really complement and enhance those plans. So we try to work in a coordinated way with our colleagues in the SDFA division and the Confronting Anti-Black Racism team, city planning, the real estate groups, to really make sure that we're doing those plans justice.
Okay.
I wonder, Adam, I'm just saying that because I'm newer to policy than some of my colleagues at the table, and unfortunately our Business Growth Services colleague couldn't be here today. But I did want to mention the work in terms of workforce development being undertaken as part of the Inclusive Economic Development Project, and all that work that's part of that strategy will feed into the action plan for Toronto economy. So local jobs, job quality, and inclusion will likely be one of the pillars, right, for the action plan for Toronto's economy, Adam, right?
Yeah, thanks for that, Shirley. And just to add, the two issues that you had flagged, we had heard very clearly through our economic advisory panel. And to your question around approaching the policy work, this development of the action plan for Toronto's economy is just that, kind of making those different connections. And a key piece of our work is going to be, I think like Ben mentioned, is going to be working internally with our different city divisions, so SDFA, to ensure that we're making those linkages so that the product that we do deliver to council in the fall of 2024 covers all those bases. Thank you.
And then through the chair to the member, I think you bring up, obviously, this important point when it comes to youth. So not only youth mentorship programs and youth volunteer programs, I mentioned a few of those quickly in the presentation today, but extending that into, good jobs and then connecting that youth mentorship and youth development into workforce development. So I can imagine looking to Adam that we are ensuring, you saw as part of the divisional strategy, we engaged the youth, Toronto Youth Cabinet, and youth is being interwoven into the engagement processes for the two action plans as well. So, but it's thank you so much for bringing it up because, is our future. Thank you.
Thank you. We have Shannon Lawrence online who wants to speak, ask a question. Go ahead. Shannon?
Hi, good morning. Thank you. And apologies, I can't be there in person. I did have a question or a comment just echoing some of what I've heard, but around culture and what defines culture, just really wanting to understand how the definitions of culture when we're talking about investment or grant opportunities are decided and defined, and really wondering if there's a deep think about going beyond, what I would say is like food and festival culture and looking at supporting deep culture and what the thoughts are around that. And just also to respond on the youth piece, I actually was coming at this from a different point of view, which is that a lot of folks are aging out of that youth category, but still, having insecure employment or insecure funding opportunities. And is there any thought around how to keep those folks engaged in those grant processes? Because I know a lot of people in my community who are aged out of that category, but still rely heavily on grants for their work. So those are my two comments, questions.
It's a really interesting point about how culture should be defined as part of this plan. So we started from a point where we were using a fairly traditional definition of culture. So we were focusing initially on areas that had been part of the City and Toronto Arts Council's mandates historically. So that included nonprofit arts, it included film and entertainment, it included museums and heritage. But through our consultations, we're really hearing a need to push and define and challenge that definition, expand it to include more intangible aspects of culture or things that we may have considered related to, but maybe not part of that definition, like restaurants, like neighborhood character, and that feeling of deep culture that you also referenced. So this is also leading us to think about perhaps a new way of approaching the title of the plan. I mean, we had started with calling it the Action Plan for Toronto's Culture Sector, but maybe this should be the Action Plan for Toronto's Culture. So we know we need to do some thinking and reframing of how we've initially approached this, but we want to hear more feedback like this so that we can continue to push ourselves and make sure that we're supporting the community in the right way.
Through the chair to the member, thank you as well for bringing up this important issue regarding youth aging out of the youth category. Often I think we go 16 to 25, 18 to 29, but I think as many of us know, that a magic number doesn't necessarily make you an established artist. It can take decades while you're still in that emerging artist field, for example. So I think that's something we can take back, a feedback we can take back as part of the planning process.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions? Online? No. Thank you so much. Mr. Williams, go ahead.
Thank you so much, Chair. Thank you very much for the presentation. Two issues. One, in your presentation, you talked about having held city community conversations, and that included Indigenous, Black folks, and Mad people. And you realized that most of these are racialized people. Which strategies are you looking at to address especially the issue of Mad people on the streets, considering that most of these are racialized folks? The second one is about job opportunities and income supports. There is a lack of equity in employing, especially at management level and senior positions at the City of Toronto. And I'm just asking, do you have an idea of what should happen and how we should have more racialized, especially Black folks, taking up senior positions at the City of Toronto? Then lastly, in terms of culture, there are new and emerging groups in the community. What strategies are there to funding these new initiatives? Or are you thinking of redirecting funding to new and emerging groups as opposed to the usual groups that have been existing? Thank you.
All right, so I'll to address the first part of your question. So for the culture plan consultation, we did a session with artists and creatives who identify as deaf, mad, and disabled. This was focusing really on issues specific to their work as artists and creative sector workers. So we know there's a lot more that's needed to happen in terms of how we better support those communities. A lot of those supports you're referring to for homeless individuals are part of other types of city strategies, but we'll certainly pass on your feedback to them. We know we need to focus on how we can support them within the areas of our particular mandate as well. On your, I guess maybe that was the third question about the allocation of funding for new and emerging organizations. So this is something we've identified as a really key issue. We don't have enough funding right now to be able to support those new and emerging organizations and give them the resources that they've been able to, that have been afforded to previous generations to be able to grow and scale and stabilize their practices. So in the challenging budget context in which we operate, we know we're going to need to make some difficult decisions in the coming years around how funding is allocated, look at different priorities, perhaps reallocations of funding within particular programs and envelopes to be able to scale and expand those new organizations that really will represent the next generation of culture in Toronto.
Through the chair to the member, thank you for the multifaceted question. Just two things I was hearing regarding your comment around homelessness and the unhoused and addressing basic needs. I just should also say there is another city division working on that. And regarding the additional part about job opportunities and pathways, that's something that we hope to address in the action plan for Toronto's economy through a third pillar around inclusion and ensuring that success is measured through the inclusion in terms of that area.
Yeah, thank you. Any other questions? Lucina, go ahead.
Thank you, Councillor, and thank you for your presentation. I think inclusive economic development is it's a very broad term, so I would hope to see, as the strategies take shape, that that's really parsed out in terms of like what that looks like and the elements of inclusive development, but not just development, but protections as well. So inclusive economic protections and prevention of inequities. And I'm thinking particularly around, like, for example, on the economic side, like how are we addressing the overrepresentation of Black folks in like high-risk, low-paying, precarious work and essential positions that are subject to a lot of physical and health and mental health risks, particularly in the social service sector and the health sector as well. How are we enabling artists and businesses to take creative risks in an economy that's very challenging? And then also, I'm thinking about immigrants as well. And so how are they being considered, particularly in entering the Canadian workforce and being supported in having their foreign credentials recognized? So those are some of the things that I was thinking of. And then also in the area of climate change and climate resilience, like also supporting businesses to be equipped for that infrastructure, right? And those considerations are important, but I think it's part of, you know, some of the discourse that is really important right now and that we want to see in terms of building climate resiliency and emissions and reducing emissions and stuff like that. So yeah, inclusive economic protections and prevention, I think.
Through the chair to the member, inclusive economic development is incredibly important to the work across the 3 different plans and strategies. The report that's going to council about inclusive economic development is going to present how that will be achieved and how the city will take a coordinated approach to advance it. And the way that we're planning on embedding inclusive economic development is going to be across the 3 different strategies and plans that are going to council in the fall. So that will create a key foundation for the work going forward for all 3 plans.
And I can, through the chair to the member, just speak very quickly because I know we have a packed agenda to climate resiliency, and that is something we are looking at including specifically as a goal. I can't say we came in an early stage here, so I can't say exactly what that will look like quite yet, but it's definitely, as we live every day through a climate emergency, on our radar as EDC. Absolutely.
Thank you. Kathy?
I want to thank you so much for your presentation and also for the thoughtful questions from my colleagues from around this table, I guess, from around this room. I am a part of the Solid Black Collective, which is actually currently also gathering the stories of Black creatives and the issues which are creating barriers to progressing through from emerging to established creative. And when I look at the list of things which you have heard already, all of them have come up in our consultation. But as I hear the questions which are have been raised in this room here, there are other things that are missing from what it is that you have learned thus far. And so, Lucinda, when you talk about inclusive economic development, everybody reports the fact that during Black History Month, you know, there's an abundance of opportunities to showcase creative practice, but during the rest of the year, there is very little opportunity to actually do that. In part is because there are venues that don't actually support Black artists' work. And so I would say that thinking in terms of how it is that there's inclusive development that includes creating support for Black-owned galleries and Black-owned venues to showcase work becomes really important in trying to address that. Similarly, Shannon, you talked about what defines culture, and I would say that also the question has come up, what defines Black art? And so is Black art by something that's identifiably Black, or is it produced by an artist who identifies as being Black? And that is a problem sometimes for individuals who are trying to find grants to support their work, because I really appreciated what you said, Sharius, in terms of grants and for community, but also for individual creatives about what it is that they find is relevant, and that becomes extraordinarily important. And what we have is a lack of Black representation. You know, I'm talking about African, Black, Caribbean representation on juries, selection juries. Okay, which is something that definitely needs to be, how do we develop those juries so that they know how to evaluate grant applications that come in? And mentorship has been spoken all around here, and it's like, absolutely, you know, how do you get mentorship on how to write that grant? You know, I appreciate what Queen is saying in terms of she's learning how she goes. And that's how we all are doing, is learning how we go, but where is that support so that we can actually get the tools and the resources in order to know, in order to know what to do next, and get the feedback about what you didn't do right in writing that grant so that you can go ahead and be more successful the next time. And then also, Zachariah, you talk about the Black community. I understood it as being not being monolithic, and you know, we have been homogenized as Black culture, but we have Somali culture, and we have Caribbean culture, and you know, we have Ghanaian culture, and we have, you know, African Canadian, you know, African American culture, and so you know, I would say that. As we think forward about what that cultural development plan is to create that space in order to have expression of all of our identities, and which also includes intersectional identities, because we often have funding which is targeted, like for, we talked about deaf, you know, disability, you know, funding, and now we have Black funding, and we have maybe funding targeted for women, but what about the Black woman who's disabled, you know? And so how do we, you know, how do we have funding that recognizes the intersectional identities that we have?
Did you want to respond, or? Good. Okay, thank you. Queen, a very short comment, 3 minutes max.
I just wanted to affirm what my sister Kathy was saying. I actually was going to make a very similar comment. As someone who's neurodivergent, I find too, specifically in pockets of funding, sometimes in arts funding, but often in, well, I don't think I've ever seen it in public art funding, specific funding geared towards accessibility and having someone that you can pay to support accessibility needs.
Okay, thank you. Seeing no, okay, Shannon, 3 minutes max. Go ahead.
I just wanted, it'll be 1 minute. I just wanted to sort of like champion all that's just been said. And again, with the age piece, I think that speaks to mentorship, and it speaks to knowledge translation in the community. If we're not funding folks to pass on that knowledge and to pass on what they've learned, then all of that investment, previous investment, doesn't get translated throughout the community. So 24 seconds, there you go.
Okay, thank you. Any, oh boy. Okay, Ms. Newton-Thompson.
Thank you so much, Councillor. I'll take a part of her 3 minutes. She didn't quite get the full 3 minutes. So I just wanted to go back to the new and emerging groups. And I think it was, someone here was talking about that as well. And what I wanted to say about that is that from your perspective, it might be new and emerging groups, but there are groups that have been struggling for decades, and they're not getting funding, they're not getting in the door. And someone talked about mentorship. And I think what happens, like sometimes the information does not get to them. They didn't do something right, and nobody tells them what it is they're not doing right. So I just wanted to make sure that we register that.
Okay, thank you. Any speakers on this item? Seeing none, who'd like to move it? Mr. Williams, all those in favor of receipt? Opposed? Carried. Wonderful. I do have to leave at 12:15 because I have an announcement to make with the mayor at University in Kings, so I have to find my way down there. But I would like to arrange the order of the two items left. Rather than going to 2.3, let's go to 2.4. It should be an easy item. I will speak to it briefly, and then I'll have Pat Tobin. Maybe, did you want to speak to this as well, Pat? No? Item number 2.4, the renaming. Let me just speak to it first. So just for context. So at the January council meeting, Councillor Cole passed a motion to have this item come here. It's around the renaming of city assets. As you may know, the mayor has, council has deferred the renaming of Dundas Street due to funding, and deferred, not the operative word here. But what we have decided to do is to actually rename 4 city assets. One of them, of course, is Young Dundas Square to Sankofa Square, and that is in the process of happening. Dundas Station to be renamed Toronto Metropolitan University, TMU Station, and that too is in the process. Toronto Library is one of the assets, and they have their own process for doing that as well. The one outstanding item is Dundas West Station. And so the issue is that the committee that actually started this process, made up of 20 Indigenous elders, Black leaders, Black scholars, and business professionals along Dundas. They actually shortlisted to, I think, 3 or 4 names, right? And some 4 names, thank you. And Sankofa was one of the names. So Councillor Cole arbitrarily decided to add Dudley Laws and Charles Roach to perhaps renaming of the Dundas West Station. I did put a motion here to add the remaining 3 names that the advisory committee had recommended, which was Chloe Cooley, John M. Tinsley, and Blackburn. Again, to respect those who put the work in, I think it's important to, well, again, it's respect to put it back to those who were assigned to do that work. I'm going to have Pat Tobin perhaps elaborate on what I just said.
Thank you very much, Councillor Moise. And hello, community. Nice to meet you. Thank you for having me. I was originally not able to be here. My meeting ended earlier, so I came down to support the team that you just saw, as well as colleagues that will come online now. There's Leet Mangat. My name is Pat Tobin. I'm the General Manager, Economic Development and Culture. And as Councillor Moise says, I'll provide a bit more context before handing over to our project manager, Leet. As well as Dr. Melanie Newton of the University of Toronto, who is one of the 2 co-chairs for the Community Advisory Committee that has worked for years for the Dundas renaming project. And our purpose in being here today was really threefold. One, Councillor Moise suggested we thought it was a good idea to help provide background, answer any questions as to how we arrived at this point with the council direction of December 13. Number 2, as Councillor Moise has outlined, talk a bit about next steps. But number 3, provide you a bit of context around those names that might be under consideration for the last remaining of the 4 civic assets that Councillor Moise outlined. So I'm just going to check to make sure Dr. Newton is available because she was kind enough to join us from a conference in Montreal. In fact, she's giving, I think, the Black History Month lecture for McGill University today. Dr. Newton, are you...
Melanie will be joining in a few minutes. There you go. Right here.
Okay, perfect. So I don't know if staff, if we could get Dr. Newton visible for the committee, if that was possible. Perfect. There.
Hello, Dr. Newton. Nice to see you again.
Okay. So with that, if I could ask, I'll turn it over to Dr. Newton and Leet, and they'll be able to cover those three areas that we just mentioned.
Good morning, Councillor Moise and Confronting Anti-Black Racism Advisory Committee members. Thank you, Pat. As Pat mentioned, my name is Leet, Senior Project Manager for Museum and Heritage Services. And also joining me today is Dr. Melanie Newton, one of the co-chairs for the Recognition Review Community Advisory Committee. Dr. Newton is an Associate Professor of History at University of Toronto, where she teaches Caribbean and Atlantic World History. Thank you for joining us, Melanie. I will screen share the presentation. The purpose of today's presentation, as Pat mentioned, is to provide some history and background on the Dundas Street renaming project, also known as Recognition Review. We hope to offer some additional context to the Members' Motion 13.29, which was adopted by City Council at its December meeting. As a reminder of how this started, in the summer of 2020, there was an online petition that was signed by close to 14,000 members of the public calling for Dundas Street to be renamed. In response to the petition, a working group of staff was formed, including the city's Confronting Anti-Black Racism Unit and the Indigenous Affairs Office, to examine the issue. Following discovery sessions with community members, as well as extensive academic research and a review of several hundred global case studies, City Council voted to rename Dundas Street and other civic properties with the Dundas name in July of 2021. There were two tracks to this original council direction. One focused on creating a commemorative framework process, which was completed and adopted by council in July of 2021. And of course, the second path, which with the direction to start a renaming process for Dundas Street, guided by Community Advisory Committee. The Recognition Review Community Advisory Committee, often referred to as CAC, was formed in fall of 2021. Members were recruited through the city's CABR unit, as well as IAO, Indigenous Affairs Office, in partnership with local city councillors that represented wards that include Dundas Street. There are 20 CAC members that are made up of Black and Indigenous leaders, along with residents and business owners living and working along Dundas Street. The committee is co-chaired by Elder Catherine Tomero, a seated spotted turtle clan knowledge keeper, artist, and art administrator, and of course, Dr. Melanie Newton, Associate Professor of History at the University of Toronto. The focus of the CAC was providing advice on guiding principles and processes for naming and renaming streets and properties in the future, developing the short list of new names for Dundas Street and Young Dundas Square, and also helping to shape a transition plan to support residents and businesses impacted by full renaming of Dundas Street. I'd also like to note that the CAC was supported by a citywide interdivisional working group. This timeline is just to convey the duration of the project and the commitment of the CAC. It should be noted that there were two significant pauses during election periods in 2022, as well as in 2023 with the recent mayoral by-election. Over this 2-year period, the CAC met 19 times, and a key outcome of meeting 19, which we know took place in December, was the Community Advisory Committee reaching consensus on the new name for Young Dundas Square, Sankofa Square. And this was adopted by council at their December meeting. This is a visual reference for the timeline as outlined in the adopted motion. City Council directed Young Dundas Square to adopt the new name, Sankofa Square, and requested that the Toronto Public Library Board and the Toronto Transit Commission Board implement renaming their assets bearing the Dundas name. In addition to that, there is the direction to undertake public education efforts to acknowledge the impact of the Transatlantic slave trade and slavery in keeping with the International Decade for People of African Descent. The next steps for the various parts of this council direction include the Toronto Public Library, who are currently following the renaming policy and process with their TPL board. They do plan to do community consultation this March or April with the hopes of bringing forth a new name for board approval at their June meeting. This timeline also allows for signage replacement to take place in September of 2024. With regards to Young Dundas Square, this will be led by YDS Management and supported by EDC as well as SPEC, which is Strategic Public Employee Communications. For TTC, the next step is voting to adopt City Council's request at the TTC's upcoming board meetings, which is scheduled for February 22nd. And of course, public education. This will be co-led by EDC and CAVR. We have closed the interdivisional working group that was previously supporting the Dundas renaming project over that 2-year time frame. And we're currently in the process of forming a new public education team. And the approach of this work will be informed by the CAC co-chairs. I will pause now and pass it off to Dr. Melanie Newton, who will speak to CAC naming process and all the thoughtful work involved with arriving at Sankofa Square.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me? Okay, so thank you for inviting me today. I'm happy to be part of this process and to contribute to this conversation. So what you can see here, over the course of 2 years, we spent a long time thinking through what kinds of priorities were essential in terms of thinking through coming up with a new name. So some of the core priorities were really thinking about the reasons why this was important, and to center a name that would really focus on, again, healing, thinking about a way forward. So a name that was really positive, that would engage people, that would educate people, would help them to think about this histories of, as we were thinking about the legacies of Henry Dundas, of the kinds of violence that Black and Indigenous people had faced as a result of Dundas's policies, to really think about helping people think about this history in new and different ways that centered survival and struggle and beauty, for example. And to really focus on celebrating the idea of Dundas Street and Dundas Square as places where people gather in the city. We also had discussed issues of accessibility in terms of a name that was very simple and very was easily translatable. The question of ceremonial names, we really had a long debate. We went back and forth on the idea of whether a name should center a concept or a person. I mean, on the one hand, it is important to recognize that most streets in Toronto it does seem named after people. Very few are named after people who are, people of Black or Indigenous heritage, or particularly women. At the same time, we recognize that naming streets after people can be very complicated. That does require a really deep level of research, because you look at what's happened now. There's nothing to prevent future generations from rethinking the priorities around why they might have chosen a particular person. But you really have to be careful to do your due diligence, that you're not overlooking very obvious issues that could be a problem in the future. And we also felt that concepts had a really particularly inclusive significance. And so in the end, even though we did go back and forth on this, we did in the end choose from our short list of names a name that was a concept. And we also wanted a name that had a clear historical and cultural connection to Toronto. And the name that we did choose, and I guess we're going to move to the next slide now. So before I speak about the name specifically, we worked on a consensus model where we wanted to make sure that no members of the committee felt at any point like they had really strong concerns and objections that were just being dismissed. So we tried to bring people, as much to a point of common ground in our conversations as possible, even when those conversations were challenging. And I will emphasize that it took us a long time to get to that place in terms of trust in each other, a deep and shared understanding of the process. I mean, none of us had a deep understanding of how street naming worked in the city of Toronto. We learned a lot about the emergency services. We learned a lot, we learned a lot that none of us knew. So there was a lot of collective learning that allowed us to come to a place where decisions could be made on this kind of consensus model. It's not something that you can just, put people in a room and they just do immediately. It takes work. Right. So I think that should brings us to the slide where we talk about the name that we did choose. So we had names on our short list, we had long list of names that emerged within the first year of our work. I cannot remember the precise meeting where this happened. There are notes that would explain that. But these names came out of really deep conversation, a lot of research. Sankofa was one of a few names that were based on concepts from the continental African context that I actually researched, involving interviews with colleagues, careful research about where is this name, where are these words used, what is the context, where does it seem like they emerged from, based on a combination of my own research and then sort of looking in through in libraries and so on, talking to colleagues, but then also my own knowledge of how these names have evolved in terms of their use. And the name Sankofa, so it means, look back to go forward or go back and fetch it. There are a number of different ways to translate it. So it actually originates, it says Ghana here, but so the Akan speaking region of the African continent is a huge cultural area. It does include modern Ghana, but it's a huge cultural area of Africa historically. And many people who ended up as victims of the transatlantic slave trade were people from this cultural area. So it's actually the heritage of large numbers of people in the African diaspora, particularly, but not only people who are in the English-speaking Americas. So many people of Caribbean and sort of North American Black heritage have some Akan ancestry. So, for example, things like Anansi stories, which we're sort of, many of us are familiar with. This is part of Akan cultural tradition. So it's a foundational part of the modern cultural heritage of the Americas, and that is a heritage that is shared. And this concept emerges in the 18th century at the height of what must have been a real maelstrom for people of the threat of enslavement, and it's part of a sort of series of symbols that were meant to be reproduced in various forms of material culture, on print cloth, on sort of items of everyday use that had these important aphorisms that were meant to be uplifting. So this is the one that we chose for the name in the end, and in the end that was a consensus choice. It was the name that we all felt really strongly was a name that people could embrace in the city, that met the priorities that we had laid out previously. I think there was one more slide. Right. Oh, that's it. So yeah, hope that explains our process. But I do just want to stress that this is hard work, and it takes a lot of trust within the committee. It took a lot of work with the Indigenous Affairs Office, with the Anti-Black Racism Committee, with a lot of folks in the city to support us into figuring out what kind of information do we need in order to arrive at these good decisions. So, thank you.
Thank you very much to our presenters. I would now like to open up the floor for any questions to our presenters. Yes, Dr. Newton-Thompson, go ahead.
It's not so much a question. Well, I guess it is. I just wasn't, I don't know how we could have been aware that this committee was sitting and contemplating these names. And I think Sankofa is a really appropriate name. But when I saw Blackburn there, I thought of Thornton and Lucy Blackburn, who were the first transportation within Toronto who, the color of the streetcar we use now is the same color of his carriage that he used to use back, I don't remember when, but it was, he had been a freedom seeker coming over to Canada from Kentucky. And so if I were on that committee, I was going to vote for Thornton Blackburn, even though I think Sankofa is also an appropriate name.
Would the presenters like to respond?
Sure. Maybe I'll respond briefly, and Emily can assist you. In any renaming process, there are a few steps that are taken, including if it's in honor of someone living or deceased, checking with the family to ensure their support. Second is also checking with first responders and emergency services to see if the introduction of the new name duplicates any other name and could create confusion or disruption to emergency response. In the case of Thornton and Lucy Blackburn, the establishment of the city's first livery service, that was the case that there are other spaces in the city named Blackburn, and emergency services advised that it could be problematic in that case. So that suggestion was actually removed from consideration at the committee's request, and they moved forward with the others. But Emily, Dr. Newton, anything you want to add to that?
Nothing on my end. I'll throw it to Melanie.
Yeah, that was the reason. We also thought it was a beautiful name, but the fact that there was already something, I think there was also already something named Blackburn, and we went through a whole range of different permutations, including, for example, Blackburn family. But then we came across the fact that we don't actually know necessarily that much about the other members of the Blackburn family, and that principle that if you choose to name something after people you don't actually know what might be in that space that might emerge later, that then we might find ourselves having chosen a name that came under a kind of scrutiny that we had not anticipated. So there was really no way to, make sure that that would not happen. So we did have to remove the name from consideration.
Go ahead.
Am I allowed to?
Right, one last, right, one. We also thought of Thornton and Lucy Blackburn, but it was too long.
It was, pardon?
Too long. It was too long, and would cause trouble with, again, emergency services. Like it created, and it was not necessarily an accessible name for, in terms of making sure that people, if they were, in an emergency, could actually, enter the name correct, and so on.
Am I allowed to speak?
Yes, if you have a response, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Newton. I just think the name Blackburn, I don't see the confusion, but then I didn't consider all of the situation. The Thornton and Lucy Blackburn were very well researched. There's a lot written on them. There was an archaeological dig at the Inglewood Community School where they lived. There's lots of historical information. I was part of that dig when I was the president of the Ontario Black History Society. So I know there's a lot written on them.
Thank you. We'll now move to our next question by Waleed. Go ahead.
Thank you, Lucina. I have a question with regards to the educational component when it comes to the naming of our public spaces and city, I guess the people's assets. Because we don't want confusion, right? We want people to understand why the significance of naming a building or a facility after a prominent member of our community. Could you elaborate on how you undergo that process of educating the public? Is it just a city council, motion that's approved, and then people are just gonna go on social media and confuse other people or not, really understand the significance of the naming? Or is there an actually intentional campaign done by the city or its agencies or to really profile the significance of the naming? Thank you so much.
Thank you. Through the chair to you. And in deference to Dr. Namli, I dropped by for support, but I'm gonna take a first shot at the answer and then turn to my expert colleagues. With apologies, I'll have to depart also in a few minutes. But it's a very good question. First, I'll answer in the broad term, which is Emily referenced a recognition review. And so I'll turn to her in a moment to talk about how the city is remaking the way by which it names assets to include components of public education, as your question asks. Secondly, with specific respect to Dundas, Young Dundas Square being renamed Sankofa Square, as Dr. Newton and Emily walked through, there's a number of procedural steps that we are in the midst of taking now where City Council can direct the Young Dundas Square Board to make the change, but needs to recommend such a change be made for the TTC and similarly for the Toronto Library. So we're passing through all the governance processes to have it adopted. And in the case of Sankofa, Emily noted that on February 15, we will join the Young Dundas board to have it formally adopted there. And then we'll work through how the change to include the public education component would work. But Dr. Newton provided you the most eloquent explanation I've heard to date, which will probably be at the center of our public communication efforts. But let me turn to Dr. Newton and Emily to clarify anything.
Thank you, Pat. What I will add, and thank you for the question, with regards to public education, we have a massive platform, which is Toronto History Museum, so 10 sites spread across the city, and we will form a new public education team. I mentioned we are closing the interdivisional group, and we'll form a new team that will focus on how do we activate these sites to truly explain the concepts of COFA and further the public education. And this will be done over a 2-year time frame. So it'll be active work that will be rolled out. And this month we are just in the works of forming that new public education team to focus our efforts on this.
If I could just interject, just given that it is 12:30, I propose a motion to for the committee to extend its meeting past the scheduled 12:30 time, and a lunch recess to complete item CR24 on the agenda. Can I call on George to move the motion? Okay, all in favor? Okay, carried. So I believe we had additional questions, unless the presenters, you wanted to continue on that last point. Okay.
I'm okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I believe Dr. Daniel had a question. Go ahead.
Thank you. I think it's a combination of a question and a comment. To what extent have we considered the fact that most of us in the African diaspora, we are walking around with the names of our former masters? So when we think of renaming spaces, but we're using the names of people who enslaved us, how does that actually move the conversation forward? So, and I understand, Karis's point about the Blackburns, but the name Blackburn is a slave name, right? So to what extent has there been some conversation about moving beyond our slave names in terms of how we think about the process of renaming?
Would presenters like to respond?
Thanks for the question. Through the chair, I'll defer to Dr. Newton, who's, I think, ready to provide you a response.
Thank you so much for the question. I don't know that in our committee conversations we phrased it exactly that way, but I think there was a very strong sense when we were thinking about concepts that we really wanted to be sure that there were concepts that were clearly to be under, like that there was clear that a choice was being made to center philosophical traditions, relationships to land, relationships to each other, that prioritized things that we all want as human beings, but that come out of the intellectual traditions. Once we decided that it was a name that was going to come out of the African diaspora context, that really came out of an African diaspora context. So I think the choice of name that we landed on, in some ways, even though we didn't phrase things quite the way that you're talking about, does sort of hold space for that kind of concern. I think there's a broader conversation to be had that maybe is beyond what this committee could have done, to think about that bigger question of, all the many things that we have inherited as legacies, and as part of our everyday lives from the history of slavery. So there are some things, that's beyond what we could do as a committee, but hopefully this choice that we have made will enable us to go forward in ways that do help us to have precisely the kinds of conversations that you are signaling. So I think that's important, a little bit beyond our remit, but I do hope that we will be able to move forward, thinking about things that are important to us as people of African descent in the future. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions? Okay. Any speakers to this item? Okay, so hearing no further speakers, I will bring forth the following motion and recommendation that the Confronting Anti-Black Racism Advisory Committee recommend that the city manager ensure that the governing bodies overseeing the decision on the naming City of Toronto assets consider Dudley Laws, Charles Roach, Chloe Cooley, John M. Tinsley, Blackburn, among the broader list of names for consideration to rename assets, along with names of anti-racism trailblazers and leaders to highlight the City of Toronto's commitment to anti-racism. Further, to reaffirm support for the existing processes for the naming of City of Toronto assets that have been identified, and to develop and generate names under consideration for asset naming, and as such, defer decisions on which names to consider to their respective governing processes. So all of those in favor of the motion? Any opposed? And the motion carries. Thank you, everyone. I believe we'll now take a recess. Apologies, those were two different motions in one. So I will start again. Okay, so the first motion, I will reread. So we recommend that the city manager ensure that the governing bodies overseeing the decision on the naming City of Toronto assets consider Dudley Laws, Charles Roach, Chloe Cooley, John M. Tinsley, and Blackburn among the broader list of names for consideration to rename assets, along with the names of anti-racism trailblazers and leaders to highlight the City of Toronto's commitment to anti-racism. So all of those in favor? Sorry, removal of Blackburn according to our conversations earlier. So all of those in favor? Any opposed? Okay, so the motion carries. And then the second motion is to reaffirm support for the existing processes for the naming of City of Toronto assets that have been identified and developed to generate names under consideration for asset renaming and defer decisions on which names to consider to their respective governing processes. All of those in favor? Okay. Any opposed? Okay, motion carried. Thank you, everyone. And we'll now take the recess. How long? until 2 o'clock, please. Thank you.
Short recess? Yeah, I figured. Half an hour? It's up to. It's up to. Break until.
Okay. Sorry, everyone. So it's up to the committee how long we want to recess for and continue the agenda items. So I'll just open it up. Do we want to do 15 or 30? 5 minutes?
5 minutes, yeah.
5 minutes? Okay. I'm hearing 5 minutes, so we'll just take a 5-minute recess. Thanks.
I guess we can go down to the cafe.
We need to visibly confirm she's there.
Okay, everyone. So we're going to reconvene. Thank you for your patience. So to ensure we have quorum, could I just ask committee members who are online to turn on their cameras to confirm their presence? Okay, so we've reached quorum, so we'll now proceed. I'd like to first propose a motion to amend or to revisit the previous item to advance a clear motion regarding the renaming of assets. Oh, sorry. Thank you for your patience, everybody. I'm still not quite sure of processes, but I have to acquire or receive a vote to revisit the item. So quickly, all of those in favor to reopen quickly? Yeah. Thank you. Anyone opposed? Okay, carried. And I'll now reread the proposed motion. Okay, one moment. Sorry, everyone, just having some technical difficulties. So we're just waiting for quorum to be reached once more. Thank you for your patience, everyone. Okay, so we now have quorum. So we're going to have to vote again to reopen item CR 24. May I please see a hand of a show of hands to reopen the item? All in favor? Any opposed? Okay, carried. And I'll now present the revised motion for item CR 24. Okay, so it's the recommendation that the Confronting Anti-Black Racism Advisory Committee revise the following. And, pardon me, I'll start over. Recommend that the city manager ensure that the governing bodies overseeing the decision on the naming City of Toronto assets consider Dudley Laws, Charles Roach, Chloe Cooley, John M. Tinsley among the broader list of names for consideration to rename assets, along with names of anti-racism trailblazers and leaders to highlight the City of Toronto's commitment to anti-racism. All of those in favor? Okay. Any opposed? Okay, so we have one opposed. So the motion still carries. Thank you, everyone. So we'll now circle back to item CR23, the last, which will be our last item. But the last term of committee welcomed a presentation from city planning staff on the official plan review. The committee provided important feedback and had requested that staff return with an update before going to council. And so we're going to welcome staff back to present and share an update in relation to our plan Toronto. I'd like to welcome Jeff Cantos, Manager for Official Plan and Legislation, who will give a presentation on our plan Toronto Chapter 1. So go ahead, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. As the Madam Chair says, my name is Jeff Cantos, and I'm joined with colleagues Kyle Ferrin and Liam O'Toole. And I've got about a 7 to 10 minute presentation to take you through. And like Madam Chair said, we've been to the committee before. I think it was a year or two ago. We've done some homework, we've done some engagement, and hopefully we've been able to address comments that were received and potentially enhance the work that we've done. Okay. And some questions that we were asked to pose to the committee. So I'll be presenting some draft Chapter 1 language, and we just wanted to ask if the draft language that I'm about to present captures or addresses the committee's mandate of helping to eliminate barriers faced by Black communities. And the second question, if there's time, I know it's been a long day, is that the City Planning Division continues to review and update the official plan. And our question to you, our advice that we seek back from you is what are the best approaches to keeping connected, us being the City Plan Division, with Black communities across the city. And so take you through a quick objective to date, where we've been, the draft outline, the work that we're presenting, some next steps, and some input. So today, the official plan, Chapter 1, I'm just going to backtrack. What an official plan is. An official plan is a citywide document adopted by council that we use as a city to help guide land use planning decisions into the future. It's a 30-year planning horizon. And so today, Chapter 1 was written back in 2002. So when the city amalgamated, we created the official plan, and it's been some time, and now we're reviewing it and rewriting it. And those are the ingredients of today's Chapter 1 that we're proposing to replace. And what we're proposing to replace it with are these sections that I'll take you through, each of them in this slide deck. Starting in 2020, we've done a number of engagement throughout the city with applying an equity lens and a reconciliation lens, and we connected with several groups across the city. We initiated what's called a Community Leaders Circle, and the Community Leaders Circle, the CLC, is a group, are individuals that work across the city with different communities, with different types of stakeholders. For example, we did not directly consult with homeless youth in Rexdale, but a homeless youth worker in Rexdale was part of our CLC with whom we consulted a number of times over the course of the last couple of years, and we compensated their time so that they could talk to their constituencies and then come back to us with input that we could address along with the other groups on the slide. The next slide. So the different components that I mentioned, I will take you through them, but I will focus on the orange path in the middle. So what we're proposing is to start Chapter 1 of the official plan with a section on Indigenous planning perspectives, and this is to reflect the city's commitment to reconciliation. We also want to include the land acknowledgement that we as a city start our public meetings with. We hope to also include a sidebar, and a sidebar is explanatory text within the official plan that helps to describe the body of the official plan. So we will include our land acknowledgement in the official plan. The next section is about planning for Toronto's future, and it's just a little bit more capacity building to demonstrate where the official plan sits within the policy-led planning system within which we work. So what that means is we as municipalities in Ontario, we kind of get our abilities and our authorities to do what we do from the province, and that comes through from the Planning Act, provincial policy statement. So that's kind of the matters of provincial interest, that orange circle over there. And then embedded within there are what's called regional planning. So the growth plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe area is a plan that all land use decisions must conform to. So we can't conflict with the growth plan. And then there we are in the middle, the green circle, the official plan nestled within regional planning. And from there, how we implement the plan are through what we call secondary plans and zoning bylaws. So we're talking about the kind of middle rung. And in terms of our priorities, we want to set priorities in the official plan. So a short section that lists some of our main priorities. Again, number one, advancing reconciliation, taking action on climate change and its impacts, addressing housing affordability and economic prosperity amid the population growth that we are expecting, and reducing inequities experienced by Torontonians and Indigenous peoples. And so the aspirational part of the official plan is our 2051 vision. Again, as I mentioned, this is a land use document that looks 30 years into the future. So the city that we want in 2051 achieves these goals. The first being complete communities that eliminate disparities, climate resilience, and net zero emissions. And the third, Toronto being the most inclusive city in the world. I'll take you through one by one. So the first one, eliminating disparities. We know as land use planners that when we plan and achieve complete communities, we can help eliminate disparities for all Torontonians. And so we'll include a sidebar about what is a complete community, and that is there to basically, it's kind of the ingredients that we need as residents within our community so that we can live, work, shop, and access services, without the need of a private automobile. So everything close by. The next one is about climate action. So the vision here is about getting towards net zero and reduce emissions by 2040, and this is consistent with the city's Transform TO initiative. The next one is about being the most inclusive city in the world. So we do know that diversity is one of Toronto's strengths, and in order for that to remain so, it takes intentional planning. So we are going to state that, and we're going to include sidebars of what inclusive planning could mean and what universal accessibility could mean within our communities. Again, these are words in our official plan that we as land use planners and our frontline planners that work in community can use as they communicate with members of the public and to help our decision makers. So we're asked often, how do we get there? And we believe that if we apply these principles towards our vision, we can get there. So the first being reconciliation, access, equity, and inclusion. And I'll take you through these. The first one being reconciliation. So again, reconciliation in land use planning is about repairing relationships and partnering with Indigenous groups. And in 2022, the city passed its first reconciliation action plan, and we want to embed a connection with the reconciliation action plan into the official plan and the 28 meaningful actions across the 5 themes in the reconciliation action plan. The next one is about access, and this is a term that can be used for many facets of daily life: access to affordable housing, access to good transit, access to services, schools, etc., and also businesses' access to a labor pool. And so a sidebar that we're proposing here is planning for seniors, and this is about signifying that we need to do intentional planning to plan for our most vulnerable populations. The third of 4 principle is about equity, and we want to ensure that land use planning going into the future does apply an equity lens, as such that we can identify the barriers created for Toronto's most marginalized and vulnerable residents. And so for us, this is an important consideration moving forward, and we are intending to include a sidebar so that it's clear to our land use plan, our frontline planners, and anyone who opens the official plan what we mean by this. And the sidebar would be about removing systemic barriers for Indigenous and Black Torontonians. That's on the screen there. Lastly, inclusion. So we do know that social cohesion is about creating a safe and inclusive city for all and those yet to arrive, and we want to ensure that land use decisions that we do make are inclusive of, Torontonians today, and again, those that we will be welcoming in the future as we grow. Just two more slides. In terms of implementation, so again, this is the official plan is the visionary statement that looks into 30 years, and how we implement the official plan policies and priorities and the vision that I just talked about is through what's called a secondary plan. So those are area-specific plans like the Downs View update that's happening right now, and site and area-specific policy, so that can be on one specific site. Someone mentioned the Honest Ed site, that site would have a site and area-specific policy, and then going down right to the ground with zoning bylaws and others. So we hope that this Chapter 1 and the words that I presented will help guide future growth and apply the priorities and vision and principles. And lastly, we want to make sure that the official plan has a call to action in terms of having continued dialogue with communities that we've engaged with throughout this process, so that we are accountable to make sure that we can achieve the vision that we've set out. And so we have a writer working with us to make sure that the words that we write are accessible and in plain language to the readers. We're doing presentations to your committee, to the Accessibility Advisory Committee, to 2 weeks ago to the 2S LGBTQ+ committee, and we're preparing a final report to go to Planning and Housing Committee prior to going to Council in May and April. And so thank you for your time, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Members, do you have any questions of the presenter on this item? Yes, George, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for the presentation. So I'll just jump right into it. For the 2051 vision plan, specifically relating to climate action, I noticed there's no use of specific science-based targets or KPIs. I'm guessing this might be because it's a first draft. And also the omission of any mention of climate justice. Because I know this is an intersectional lens that we try to look at, but if we're just talking about emissions, reducing emissions, but not relating it back to the equitable lens of it through climate justice and an intersectional lens at the most, I think this is how we can really bring to the forefront of how we can tackle this from a grassroots perspective, but also through an equitable lens by implementing and using the terminologies climate justice, because there can't be any sort of climate action without the justice piece to it. So I'm curious to know on your part if you plan to introduce this in future drafts and then also in the final copy as well. Thank you.
Thank you for the question through the chair. So we don't have any KPIs that we will include in the Chapter 1 because we're pointing to the Transform TO initiative that has all that specificity. But in terms of the climate justice, I think it is a concept that is important. Weaves together a bunch of ideas and priorities that we are trying to link together, and I think I will talk to the team, but I'm pretty positive it will land in the final before we go to council. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Dr. Newton Thompson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks for your presentation. I'm happy to hear that you've included Rexdale, even though it's in the most minimal way one could possibly think of, going through one person to do the contact with the homeless youth, but at least it's mentioned. So I thank you for that. The last time I noted that there was no mention of Rexdale at all. And just to tell you, my taxes will be raised just as much as anybody else in the city of Toronto. Just want to say that. Okay, secondly, looking at your slide about inclusive city, and I closed my computer, I don't know why, but you put all people and their ages and their abilities. But I don't think we can talk about people just about ages and abilities, because we know that there are people who are discriminated against. And I think we need to name who the all people are.
Right.
We can't just lump all people, because if all people were doing, everything was going well for all people, we won't have this committee, we won't have, some of the considerations we have. So we need to name who the all people are in the inclusivity of the city. So could you just, make a note of that? And, under the universal accessibility. So I just want to make those comments.
Thank you for the comments.
Okay. I will now turn it to Waleed. I believe you had a question.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I went through your presentation and I was very interested in the evaluations and benchmarks that are associated with sort of the plan specifically. And I was also interested in better appreciating your engagement strategy for Black communities, which you posed as a second part of the question. So in Regent Park and other communities that are going through redevelopment, there are planning tables with residents that are helping collect this data. For example, we have an evaluations and benchmark committee. And I'm wondering, will your approach of engagement will be to help inform, for example, the surveys that have been collected in the communities that are racialized, that are Black, and soliciting that feedback to better inform what changes you'd like to make to the plan. So there are two parts of it: the evaluations and benchmark piece, and the engagement specifically of Black communities with that focus. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. And through the chair, in terms of the evaluation and benchmarking, so our hope is that once council does adopt Chapter 1, and we use the vision, the priorities, and the principles in implementing subsequent and different amendments to the rest of the official plan. So we hope that these are the lenses that we will use to apply further revisions to the official plan on a citywide basis, area basis, and a site-specific basis. And from there, we will be monitoring, evaluating, and creating new benchmarks. So for that perspective, and in terms of engagement with Black communities, so the City Planning Division are very committed to engaging all communities, including Black communities, and doing it differently. And how we've been doing that, we've been mandatory training for management on confronting anti-Black racism, mandatory training for our frontline staff in engaging Black communities as well, so that we do things differently and do it in a respectful way. So some examples where it has happened, I think as you mentioned in Regent Park, the Jane Finch initiative, it's happened. They've taken a context-based approach, as well as in Mount Dennis, that plan also. They learned a lot from it. I don't think it was 100%, but they learned how to do it better. So I think we acknowledge that we have to do it better, and we're doing our best to learn from what we're doing.
Yeah. Just want a quick follow-up on that. In Regent Park, we've learned through the community benefits process the importance of meeting residents where they're at. When I think of the official plan, when I think about
Waleed.
Yeah.
So sorry to interrupt, but I've been advised we've lost quorum, so we can no longer proceed.
Okay.
And we have 15 minutes to reestablish quorum.
I think she's just using the washroom. Okay. Sorry. Can I continue the conversation? Is that okay?
Well, yeah. I could also give you my email address if we take the conversation offline.
Sure, but I just want to mention this because I want my fellow colleagues on the committee to be aware of this. So the one important piece is the community learning, right? And what we learned in Regent Park is, oh, she's coming? Perfect, thank you. Okay, sounds good. So our friend is going to be joining us soon. So what we learned is that when we're talking about community benefits, it was such a complicated addiction. So we had a community learning series that we implemented that helped residents from different socioeconomic backgrounds to better appreciate what does community benefits mean, how to actively participate. So I'm interested in, you talk about commitment, right, to, training managers or training folks in position of privilege and influence, but I'm hoping that you're also thinking about resourcing the importance of engaging with residents by them understanding and learning about the official plan and the diction presented in a way that's much more accessible. Are you looking to translating the information as well? We have a lot of newcomers and other community interest in the official plan. So I was hoping you could speak to that, and thank you so much for your patience.
Thank you for the question, and through the chair. Yes, as part of our commitment, thank you for raising those items. We will include them in our. So what our staff report will have the attachment, the new chapter 1, but in the covering staff report, we'll have the to-do list of what next, and that will outline, and I'll make sure that those are included as well. Thank you.
Okay, so I don't believe there are any further questions. I just have a quick remark. I know some members have to leave shortly, but I think my concern is, or the language for Chapter 1 is quite broad, and understanding that it's meant to establish the foundations in terms of a general direction and whatnot. I'm just wondering, the decision to engage at this point, what is the rationale behind that, I guess, knowing that some of the specifics and the actions that we want to see under different dimensions of the city's vision and how it addresses anti-Black racism, what is the rationale behind engaging at this stage, knowing that the plan itself and the various chapters that are more granular have yet to take shape and are meant to be drafted by spring? Are there opportunities for further engagement, and why have we chosen to engage at this point when it's very easy to fit the language of equity, principles of equity, reconciliation, et cetera, et cetera? Clearly, those are things that align with the values of this committee, but why now?
Thank you for the question. And really briefly, it's to circle back because we were here a year and a half ago, and we were posed with specific items to address. So we wanted to come back to tell the committee. I hope we didn't get it wrong, and I hope we are moving in the right direction. And also is to establish a meaningful relationship with the committee so that we can come back as we continue to monitor. So there are other moments when we go to Planning and Housing Committee, the standing committee that reports to Council with our final report. So there's that opportunity, and then hopefully having established a relationship of trust and collaboration, that we can continue to come back and talk to the committee about our progress. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, are there any speakers to the item? Okay, so yes, Ms. Newton-Thompson.
I just want to say thank you, but when I made my comments, you did not reply that you look at the language. But I did notice that you mentioned for other people who made comments, you said, well, we'll include that, but okay, thank you.
Do we wish to respond?
Yes, through the chair, we will look at the language. My apologies for leaving that out.
Thank you very much. Okay, so hearing no further speakers or questions, do I have a motion to receive the item? All those in favor? Any opposed? Okay, so I believe the motion carries. Okay, so that concludes our meeting for today. Thank you, everyone, for your patience today as I step in for Councillor Moise. So thank you all. That adjourns our meeting.